do section 1 as
Well, that's
strategic sort of.
Henry James, isn't it? Strategic planning. So I've headed up Nick Penstock today to speak to James about what position of the highways arrangements in the immediate area of the fire.
Yep.
Because depending on who touch on it, made it right, depending on which problem and whether it came under building control. It came under building control about access potential issue. And the highways and emergency ones, that's one. So about emergency situations. So it's just what happened.
The close up the street and all that. So, I think the new I did say that.
It's a challenge. Every year it's a challenge. Let's just protect them either. Yeah. The whole point of this decision to protect the buildings and protect the council.
Given that, given one of the members of the objective is an ecologist. He's the one that basically trespassing the site.
But if you find a genuine issue, in fairness.
No, he has. I'm not up to that.
Really.
I mean, the fact is, he shouldn't be on the site in the first place.
Yeah.
That's
But
part of
it's
it.
a safety issue.
Yes, yeah. But let's not split hairs on that. Basically, yes, they shouldn't be on the site, but we found something that we are due to go for this investigating and investigate. They must believe there's a sufficient question that they would know that it was very, yes, they use the word unusual to try to get that really our ecologists to identify exactly where the open states are. That's a statement to which point I said it's not within our gift or interest to do so, is a fact of decision taking, but also the other scenario which I consider ever be possibilities of the market we've engaged in the world that's we're not there. One thing Craig mentioned is about financing Christmas. He did say that I think there's more problems than some fairness. He did say that they've been speaking to land and people trying to influence the option to buy land go out on silence. And they said, Mr. Frampton, well, encourage them not to. But they did ask the question what would stop it once the site is deep and loud to make the site which will then destroy the could be a breach.
my director.
Because we don't know exactly where it
That's the-
would open a lot kind of land. I know exactly where it's going.
They could do,
But it'll be out.
that's the stuff.
That wasn't listed,
Well,
wasn't locally listed, and if it wasn't
I'm
protected,
not sure.
and then you found the council support, there were enforcement mechanisms and everything.
There will. We would do with
And
the fact.
Exactly.
Exactly. And the mere fact that we're in
Yeah, feels a bit warm, isn't it?
No, we said we have to get the right advice.
You would do so at your own risk.
There was threat then to
Consider
fire
enforcement action.
they are fine.
It doesn't come with twice. We have to resurvey it at first. Surveys will stand up. So either do the survey that we're asking us to do now, allow it, take a risk of being held up for land ownership and court issues for doing something they shouldn't have done. And we still have to resurvey because the ecological surveys that they have provided weren't.
So that's it.
It kicks the proper way down. That's
They
Well,
will
just
just
to bring some other issues there, just look like it's all found out, you know, some other, sounds that's the term.
so did it threaten what would happen in your opinion?
It was the hypothetical.
Yeah, what would you do if we were to go out of house build something?
Not that, the actual
Should we not be doing
The
some
site owners.
No, but we're not technically on notice now, so should we not be doing some site visits just to ensure?
I did drive past the other day and there was a digger on there.
Was there, we need a bit more insight, is there? In all honesty.
Because I live right next door to it, so I drive past the site every day.
So
We need to get the money enforcement at one restaurant.
we do, because we're on notice that you might have
So
I'll drop James a line now.
please, do on
I think it
notice
was
that
as I was
there's
going home yesterday.
she might come over and there's a risk that it could
There
be
was a
reality.
digger out on the site. Yeah.
It's like to like next church, isn't it?
I just drive past it every day, so I'm my own way
So-
out of the village, yeah.
There's two books of
Well, this,
So I drive past and it really look at warehouses there. Really do that. That's what I feel.
oh, might not be doing.
That's another case.
What?
She was upset.
Yes.
Do we know who it was?
Yes.
I don't know who it was, but I knew that
Yeah, it's a
the policy or.
You could have good connections.
Sheepish.
So transparent.
One of the people that's left is Councillor Ford.
He's the main
Protagonist against it. Basically.
going to get involved in that side of things at the moment. Plenty of other things to do.
They're going to challenge our movement lines and the ecology side.
Well, they didn't see Category in the wood. Still
They
thinking
are.
about the
They
idea.
can't challenge our leaders.
No, they're going to get around that.
Going to challenge whether or not it is a priority or a habitat, and therefore is the reason why statute applicable to other lands within this habitat land that we're applying it to.
No, that comes when they run advice. Basically try to then quantify.
Yeah. They're going to say that it's a priority habitat, and they protect the habitat, and therefore we don't need to do the surveys, we can condition the surveys, essentially what I'm expecting the other side to come and say.
We will then advise them to look at James if you're advising. No, we haven't heard from every.
We have now, but even then that's too much. We explain this from a part of the year, every 2 weeks.
Good afternoon. The inquiry is now open. My microphone doesn't seem to be working. Are we not using it?
No, we are ready to put the batteries in, because that's something I was meant to do.
Actually, I can do it, not from my microphone, just from me.
I'll put batteries.
Okay.
Yeah, yours as well, sorry, I apologise. That's completely my fault. I just forgot.
I assume we're also live streaming this afternoon as well? Yeah, good. I have no opening remarks this afternoon. Perhaps towards the end of this afternoon we can talk about timings. But having done the site visit this morning, I think we've still got a good chance of finishing at a reasonable time on Friday. But we can sort of confirm that at the end of today. So in that case, Ms Daly, it's cross-examination of the appellant's landscape witness.
Yes, thank you. Just before we get to that, one of the council officers was approached this morning by a member of Great Houghton Parish Council, who I believe was watching the live stream yesterday and has now decided they would like to come and speak at the inquiry. But that individual, I think, can only come tomorrow or Friday during school hours. So it was really to ask you, sir, if there's a suitable time slot where you would like that person to appear.
Can I give that some thought?
Sure.
But there is no problem at all with the person coming in and speaking to the inquiry. It's just, as you say, he's finding a convenient gap in the programme to do that. So if I can give that some thought, perhaps at the mid-afternoon break today, and then I'll come back at that point.
Fine, I'm grateful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Mr. Goatley?
Yes, provided we can obviously fit that in at a suitable time without distorting anything else which is going on.
Yeah, I would imagine we can. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Ms Daly.
Thank you very much. So just in terms of documents, before we get started, I think it might be helpful if I say which documents I'm intending to refer to. So the parameters plan at CDH4, I think that's in folder 3, sir. And the landscape strategy in B3. think that might be in folder 2.
Yeah, it is.
I can't see any references to B.
It is in folder 2. It should be at part T.
Okay, I'll have a look into it.
And then also the National Character Assessment, the County one and the Urban Fringe Study, which are K46, 48 and 49, which I think are in folder 8.
Yeah.
CDA 4, which I think is in folder 1. I might as well have said take them all out. And the Public Rights of Way Plan, which is in K79, which I think might be in yet another folder.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah. Folder 10.
Yeah, yes, I'm afraid so. I thought it might be best to do this at the beginning rather than trying to find them all during the cross-examination, but perhaps not.
They're ready.
Good, okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Can you just help, first of all, with when you first became involved in this application or appeal?
Myself personally, I was involved after, well, I reviewed the information before the application went in, but I was principally involved after the submission and after the refusal.
Okay, so did you draft the LVIA?
I didn't, no.
And is that the document you reviewed?
Yes, the chapter that's within the environmental statement, yes.
Okay, so it's a fair assumption that you agree with its content?
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair.
Fine, okay. Now, first of all, I just want to look at some of the landscape character assessments. So if we can go first to the National Character Assessment, which is at CDK 46.
Yes, I've got that.
Good, thank you very much. So we can see, in terms of the internal page numbering, we can see at page 3 the geographical area which that character area refers to, which is obviously quite large.
Yes, that's right.
So are you there?
Oh.
Good. And then when we go to page 6, we can see the list of key characteristics, I think some of which have been replicated in both your and Mr. Wadsworth's proofs.
Yes.
And we see at bullet point 1 a reference to an open landscape of gently undulating clay ridges and valleys.
Yes.
2, bullet point 2, diverse levels of tranquility from busy urban areas to some deeply rural parts.
Yes.
We see at bullet point 4 the relatively little woodland cover referred to.
Yes. Yep.
And then down at the bottom of that left-hand column, second from last bullet point, frequent large settlements that dominate the open character of the landscape, such as Northampton and Wellingborough, and associated infrastructure.
Yes.
So there are a number of references to the land or the landscape being open or openness in those key characteristics. The assessment could have referred to the land being undeveloped, couldn't it?
The assessment could. Well, the assessment could have referred to undeveloped land. I mean, in this instance, this assessment and this area is, as you've rightly sort of said, a very broad area. I mean, many tens of square miles, and focused upon the landscape, but also including some significant settlement areas. So yeah, I mean, it could have, have said that. I mean,
But it doesn't say to undeveloped, it refers to openness specifically. And as a matter of principle, one could have land that's undeveloped but not open. So, for example, a forest. Would you agree with that?
yes. I mean, yes, it says in key characteristics, that first one says an open landscape, but equally, you've got all those other key characteristics listed there. And I think the one other thing is if you, within the same document, I think on the following page,
Northamptonshire Vales today, again, just in terms of almost an overview of this character area, it says its sense of place comes less from its overall landform and more from its visually dominant settlements and views of the surrounding higher ground. So it's quite clearly a broad character area that, you know, has got a lot of settlement in it. But yes, it's
Sure, I mean, and that's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
the,
yeah,
that's
no,
not
no,
the point
I-
I was taking.
I-
That wasn't my question.
there are areas of it that are open. I've got no issue with that.
Good. Okay. Now, just looking at the county study, which is at, so moving away from K46, looking at the county study, which is at K48.
Yes.
And again, this is just excerpts from that document. If we go to page 30, internal page 33, that's just the list of different landscape character types and then the specific landscape character areas within those types, right?
Yes.
And we're in the Broad River Valley floodplain as the character type, and then we're in 18C, Dustin Mill to Billing Wharf, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Good, okay. And then if we go down to internal page 166, which I think is the next page in the PDF, we can see a map showing, broadly speaking, what that landscape character type covers in terms of areas, correct?
Yes, correct.
And we can see a list of key characteristics that cover that broad landscape character type, and those are the characteristics that Mr. Goatley took Mr. Wadsworth to yesterday, correct?
Yes, correct.
And then following that list, there's a bit more commentary on various different issues on the next page. So physical influences, page after that, page 106, internal page. We can see there's a specific section on woodland and trees. And it says, woodland blocks of any significant size are absent from the Broad River Valley floodplain, with tree cover being restricted to smaller broadleaf copses and areas of young tree planting. Scattered tree planting is also evident along the riverside, along with areas of scrubby vegetation. In some areas, hedgerow trees are frequent within the hedged field boundaries, creating localised areas with a well-treed character. Overall, however, tree cover is very limited, with the wooded backdrop of surrounding landscape types having more significance. A sense of openness, therefore, prevails within the floodplain. So again, we've got a reference to openness, and given that that reference is made in the context of an absence generally of tree cover, we're again not talking about land that's undeveloped. We're talking about land that has a different characteristic, a visual component to openness, aren't we?
Well, we are, but I think it's not, you know, this isn't talking, I mean, even the wording in there, it does talk about the sort of creating localised areas with a well-treed character. Now, I mean, we've done the site visit this morning, the inspectors will have formed his own view, but I think, again, if we come on to the more detailed study, again, that does refer to the location that we're within as having a fairly enclosed character because of the presence of the trees. So, yes, I think probably, you know, overall, the floodplain area, there are less trees within the floodplain, lower lying land itself than on the edges of the floodplain, as we sort of evidenced this morning. But you know, certainly where the site's located, you know, there's a reasonably well-treed character.
Okay, so let me just make sure I've understood the point you're making. So you're saying that the urban fringe study refers to the character type of that our appeal sites included within as being of an enclosed character because of tree cover.
No, it mentions again, probably might be easiest if I find the reference. But
well, we'll go there after this, so that we can.
Well, if we can come back to that, then
yeah,
we'll
come. Don't worry, we'll come back to that. Okay, so that deals with the more general landscape character type area. We then find within this document some specific text about 18C, Dustin Mill to Dustin Mill to Billing Wharf, page 172, the last page of the document.
Yes. Yep.
And that refers to, I'm looking at the first paragraph. Located to the south of Northamptonshire, the Dustin Mill to Billing Wharf character area is heavily influenced by the close proximity of significant areas of urban development. Dominating the area are large man-made lakes occupying the valley floodplain, which have been created following the restoration of gravel extraction areas. The River Nen, railway lines of high voltage pylons and a section of the Grand Union Canal to the west all combine to provide a character influenced by the use of the floodplain as a communications corridor. Despite the influence of these urban and infrastructure elements, peaceful rural areas still remain. Surrounding the river and lakes is a landscape characterised by predominantly medium to large-scale pastoral fields occupied in areas with grazing cattle. Often overgrown and gappy hawthorn hedgerows divide the fields, with significant evidence of the use of post and wire fences. And we can see the photo above is Little Houghton across the floodplain, so not, I think, of the site itself, but relatively close by. So that description at 18C, that more fine-grained description, that describes the appeal site pretty well, doesn't it?
Well, if you take the paragraph as a whole with all the various other uses and influence that it talks about in terms of the urban edge, the urbanising influences, the power lines and the transport corridors, then I think it describes effectively the site and its sort of more immediate context. I think if you're trying to sort of almost pick out the medium to large scale pastoral fields with the grazing cattle, I think you can't just separate that from the rest of it. But as a whole, but equally, I mean, it's meant to describe the site and the wider context, particularly the landscape that stretches east down the River Nen Valley. I mean, I think, this general description applies probably more so to the landscape as you move sort of more east and away from the urban edge, but it's supposed to apply to the whole area.
Okay, so sorry, which specific description are you suggesting
I think
relates more to the east of the site?
Well, I think
all
of 18C, all of those, the three paragraphs that you've got there, pretty much a summary of the area of the landscape that stretches out east from the edge of the settlement.
Okay, but includes the appeal site.
But includes the appeal site, yeah.
Okay, yeah. You're not disputing that.
No, but I think you've got to take it in the round with all the other elements that are referenced in there. I don't think you can't cherry pick certain.
I haven't cherry picked.
I
read the whole paragraph
just...
to you. That is not what I have done. Good. Okay, let's move on to the urban fringe study. That's CDK 49. This is the 2018 study that was prepared in order to support the Northampton Local Plan Part 2, isn't it?
No, that's correct.
And you've fairly recognised that the landscape capacity recommendations within that report relate solely to residential development as opposed to any other form of development. So I'm not going to ask you any more about that. One thing I did want to pick up is paragraph 1.4.25, which is at internal page 12.
Yes.
That's in a section that starts at page 10 entitled Landscape Sensitivity Assessment. So it's referring to sensitivity, the assessment of sensitivity specifically. And it says, it should be noted that the overall sensitivity assessment score may not apply consistently across the entire landscape character area. For example, it could be possible for a certain scale or type of development where carefully sited, well designed and with suitable mitigation to be accommodated in an area assessed as having an overall high or moderate sensitivity to development. Conversely, in an area assessed as having an overall low sensitivity to development, it could be possible that sensitivity is higher in parts of the character area due to site-specific constraints. So the inspector will need to bear that paragraph in mind, won't he, when he considers the relevance of this study and the weight to attach to it in terms of an assessment of the sensitivity of this particular site?
He will, yeah. In terms of considering this study, yeah, I mean, that's very fair. I mean, what I would say is that obviously subsequently there is the detailed site-specific study that's been done, and also just to say in the context of that particular paragraph, certainly when you're looking at the LLCA, the local landscape character area, certainly where the site and our respective development sits, it is on the edge and is certainly more closely associated with the existing sort of urban edge and industrial uses, such that in fairly simple terms it's probably one of those areas that probably has got relative less sensitivity across the area as a whole, just because of where it's situated within the LLCA. Okay, but again, it's for the inspector to interpret it, but that paragraph's is perfectly valid.
Fine. Okay. Well, we'll look at the specific area covered in a moment. Just a similar point when paragraph 1.4.32, page 16. This is under a section entitled Landscape Capacity. And I won't read out the paragraph, but it's effectively the same point that's being made. It's saying you can't take the assessment for the entire character area as providing the answer to the capacity for a particular site. And you don't disagree with that, do you?
I don't disagree, that's correct.
Okay, and then at 1.4.33, it says, while the study provides an indication of the relative sensitivity of the character areas and the relative capacity of land parcels within Northampton, care should be taken not to interpret the results as a definitive statement on the suitability of a specific site or location to accommodate a particular type or scale of development. The findings of the study would need to be supplemented by detailed studies at a site-specific level. And to be fair to the appellant, there is obviously a site-specific study, but the inspector again will need to bear in mind this paragraph when he considers the weight to attach to this document and its relevance for the purposes of the appeal.
Correct, and it obviously leads on to the site-specific study that's in the environmental statement. Yeah,
good, okay. Now, we can see the area 18D. It's shown on figure 2.9, which is page, let me just get this right. Page, it's not got a page number, but it's just after page 82. I think the same, we discovered this yesterday.
Sorry, figure 2.9 was that, sorry?
Actually, it's not. I think that's an incorrect reference from me.
I was going to say, I've got figure 2.9 after page 27.
Yeah, no, what I'm meaning to refer to is the page between the pages 82 and 83 of the document, which shows the Washlands 18D character area.
PDF 51 of 80, if that helps.
Thank you.
Yes, got that.
And we can see it doesn't actually include Brackmills, does it? It includes Lakeside.
That's correct.
It doesn't include Brackmills. Yeah, okay. And then if we can go back up to page 75 in the document. Page 75, PDF 40.
Oh yes, yep.
That's describing not area 18D, but the key characteristics of the wider 18.
Yeah, that's correct.
The 18 area.
That's correct.
So to speak.
Yes.
And again, we can see some similar characteristics to the other assessments we've looked at.
Yes.
We can see bullet point 4, woodland, characterised by broadleaf copses and wooded corners predominantly close to the course of the river. Hedgerow trees an important feature where they occur, creating more intimate and enclosed areas in contrast to the generally more open character elsewhere. So again, we've got this reference to openness in the context of tree cover or hedgerows.
Yes, there are those references in addition to many other references as well.
And then there's also the second from last bullet point, urban influences introduce a busier and developed character. Thank you. Urban influences introduce a busier and developed character and detract from the otherwise rural character, particularly closer to the urban edge of Northampton. So those detracting features, I mean, that could be referring to the existence of the Brackmills estate, couldn't it?
It could. Yes.
And you in you in your proof of evidence refer to Brackmills as a detracting feature, so we're not in disagreement about that, are we?
No.
And I don't think it's your suggestion that the introduction of further urban or industrial development as a consequence of the appeal proposal would, you're not saying it would be an enhancement to the character of the area, are you?
No, we're saying that it will have, it will create an adverse effect and there will be harm, but the development itself is quite different from certainly the buildings that are apparent and visible on that edge of Brackmills. So we are talking about a different sort of scale of development.
As in, by that do you mean that the appeal proposal is lower in height than some of the buildings within the Brackmills estate? Yeah,
certainly there's, I suppose, height is the key thing, but also I suppose the general sort of size of the units are certainly the ones that are closest to the site are much bigger footprints.
As in, sorry, the Brackmills, do you mean the Daxer and
yeah,
there's very large buildings
yes,
located
yes.
adjacent to Bedford Road?
Yes,
okay, yeah, understood.
But the heights, I'm sure it was referenced yesterday, the new Howden buildings are virtually twice the height of what the parameters are for the proposed development.
Yeah. Good, okay, and then can we go to page 83?
Sorry, 83?
Yeah. Paragraph 2.6.26. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So it says the vegetate, and this is a description of the washlands, so we're in 18D specifically.
Yes.
It says the vegetated nature of the landscape gives a predominantly fairly enclosed feeling. I think that's the reference you were trying to make earlier in relation to the county when we were discussing the county assessment.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, yes.
And it says views tend to be shortened along the valley bottom and near to buildings and roads, though vantage points from the edges of the character area, such as along the A428, give clear views over the shallow valley to Northampton beyond. Now that last sentence, when we go back up to the page before and look at the extent of this character area,
yes,
we can see that the appeal site and indeed Bedford Road form an edge to the landscape character area. It's part of the southern edge, isn't it?
Yes, it is part of the southern edge. Yeah.
And so by that sentence 2.6.26, referring to the edge of the landscape character area, such as along the A428, give clear views over the shallow valley to Northampton beyond. I mean, I think it's fair to say that that must be referring to views across the appeal site, correct?
Not just across the appeal site. I think although the A428 sort of bounds the southern edge, where it's also bordering our site, in terms of the views across the LLCA, your views from the A428 start earlier than just where it borders our site. So in terms of views from the A428 sort of towards Northampton, what does it say?
Yeah.
It says gives clear views over the shallow valley to Northampton beyond. I mean, the first and probably most obvious one is some distance to the south or the east of our site, where you've got a very channelled view across to Northampton in the centre of Northampton, where our site doesn't figure.
Okay, but when we look at the landscape character area map, we can see that the edge of the character area, insofar as it meets Bedford Road, doesn't actually extend even to Little Houghton. Do you see that?
No, absolutely, but
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that it just talks about here of the A428 where it forms part of this LLCA.
Well, it talks about vantage points from the edges of the character area, such as along the A428. So I think it is referring to views within the landscape character area.
well, all right, are on the edges, but I think just in terms of the views from the A4 to 8, yes, certainly where it borders our site, there will be a change, and the views will be interrupted in terms of the views towards Northampton. But what I would say is, just immediately sort of east of our site, you've got views. You've still got open views across the valley. So I'm not disputing that there will be a change in relation to the views from the A4 to 8 where it borders our site. There will, but there'll still be views maintained across the valley to Northampton.
Okay. Page 84, paragraph 2.3.60. This is a familiar paragraph to the inquiry by now, I think.
So it's at
6.30,
Yep.
page 84.
Yep.
New development and changes to land management practices should be controlled or encouraged to conserve and enhance the simplicity of the open mixed farming and pastoral landscapes that characterise the undeveloped parts of the floodplain. So again, we actually do see reference to the word undeveloped here, but openness is being used in this context to describe a characteristic of the undeveloped part of the floodplain. So this isn't suggesting that openness is synonymous with land that's undeveloped, is it? It's got some other quality that's being referred to here, surely.
I think you can interpret it that it's not just saying that it's undeveloped.
Yeah,
mixed farming land. I think that's fair.
The landscape and visual impact assessment, or your colleagues, refers to the site itself as having a reasonably pleasant character. You don't disagree with that, do you?
I don't disagree. I think that I'm happy with that sort of assessment. I think that certainly its current condition, whether that's changed much over the intervening 2 or 3 years, but I think certainly its condition is something that I would have probably picked up in terms of a general description of the site.
So I'm not sure I understand that. So
I think that certainly it's.
You think the condition? Sorry, you go on.
So I was going to say, just in terms of, I suppose, the fragmented nature of the boundaries and the poor condition of the fencing and that. I think that I'd have probably referenced that in terms of some overall impression of the site.
Okay, well, I'm not suggesting that's the only description within the LVI.
I haven't got a problem. It's reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the appeal site's characteristics, those characteristics give it a greater association with the fields to the east, running up to Little Houghton, than with the developed urban edge of Northampton. That's fair, isn't it?
I think just in terms of the features on the site, the fact that at the moment it is open, rough grassland, as in there isn't development on the site. That is just in almost factual terms that's closer to probably the adjacent field to the east than it is to the industrial buildings that are to the southwest of Bedford Road.
Okay, and in terms of the interaction of the appeal site with the urban area or the urban edge of Northampton at the moment, the A428 provides a physical barrier between the site and Brackmills, doesn't it?
It provides an element between the two, but what I would say is that it provides a very obvious, busy, active influence over the site. So it may well, it's a road that runs between our site and the adjacent Brackmills area. But it's a busy urbanising influence that has quite a notable influence on the site.
Okay, and just the answer to my question, in terms of the interaction of the appeal site with the urban edge of Northampton, the A428 provides a physical barrier between Brackmills and the appeal site.
Physical barrier, yes, not yet. Yep.
Good, okay, and you're not suggesting that the development on the appeal site would be an extension to Brackmills? That's no part of your case. It's clearly across the road, isn't it?
I'm not saying it's an extension. It will certainly be perceived in the same context as the existing Brackmills buildings, and it will be read by and perceived by many people as being probably associated with that as an area of sort of employment development.
Okay. And in terms of the relationship of the appeal site with the Lakeside Business Park,
Yes.
the hedgerows provide a physical barrier between the appeal site and Lakeside at present, don't they?
Sorry, the hedgerows.
To the western boundary of the appeal site.
There's some sort of scrubby planting on the western edge of the site, but you don't necessarily read it as providing any sort of obvious visual separation to the Premier Inn and the public house and the lakeside area.
Okay, well, I mean, I won't take that any further because I know
No.
you've all seen it today. Good, okay, let's move on then to, this is a topic about scheme design, mitigation measures and the landscape strategy. So if I can ask you to have out the parameters plan and the landscape strategy, so CDH 4 and CDB 3. I think that's folder 3 and folder 2 probably.
Yes, I've got those.
That's been very good.
Good. Okay. So looking at the parameters plan first of all, in terms of what would actually be secured by this outline consent if permission is granted, it's that which is within the parameters plan, isn't it?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I appreciate you're not a planner.
Well, no, I mean,
but in broad terms, what is secured is what's within the parameters plan. What's in the landscape strategy is illustrative.
Yes, certainly the basis for the landscape visual impact assessment is the parameters plan, yes.
Yeah, understood. Okay. And we can see, just looking at the parameters plan at the moment, we can see the SPA buffer that's in sort of yellow diagonal highlighting.
Yes.
And there's a pink line which in the key at the bottom indicates no building line. It says within SPA, but I think actually it should be within SPA buffer, strictly speaking.
Yes, yes.
And so we can see that north of that pink line, broadly speaking, north of that pink line, there can be no built development. So the layout of the scheme in terms of the location of the buildings to the south of the site, that's a function of the SPA buffer, isn't it?
In terms of the limits of the built development, yes, that relates to the extent of the buffer. Yeah.
Okay. And then we can see if you're travelling along Bedford Road and you're going east, so you've got Lakeside on your left and you've got Brackmills on your right.
Yes.
If you're on the north side of the road or looking to your left in a car, there'll be Lakeside, and then there's a area of the SPA buffer where there will be no built development.
Yes.
Then there's the site access. Then you'll have the built development associated with the appeal site.
Yes.
Have I got that right?
That sounds like the right.
Yeah. Okay. So it's
sequence.
not that the development would be perceived as an extension to Lakeside or associated with Lakeside because you'll have this SPA related break in development.
Well, again, that will be in the detail in terms of the subsequent reserve matters, but in terms of whether any planting, any proposed planting sort of extends along the boundary there that might make people perceive it almost as an extension, but there will be a break in built development, yes.
Yeah, and in terms, unless the SPA buffer changes, there'll be no built development there, and if there is any planting, it will have to be consistent with the management of that SPA buffer. Correct?
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's have a look at the indicative landscape strategy then. It's CDB 3.
Yes.
Have you got it, sir? Good, okay. So we can see there that there's reference made in the left-hand side of the page to the double native hedgerows maintained at a maximum of 5 metres in height to the northern edge of the built development. And that, again, is a function of the SPA buffer, isn't it? And the need to avoid significant adverse effects on the SPA.
It is, yes.
And I think the reason for that is an attempt to avoid any interference with bird sightlines.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so in a world in which there wasn't an SPA buffer in this location and it didn't provide that constraint, would your recommendation as a landscape professional have been to introduce planting or woodland cover at a similar height and scale as the eastern and southern boundaries to the northern boundary? Appreciate you can't.
Yeah, quite probably. Certainly trees along that boundary, yes.
Okay, and then dealing with the eastern and southern boundaries, we can see there in the strategy a sort of basic idea of what they would comprise. And in your proof, you refer to those the tree cover, the hedgerows, reaching 8 to 10 metres tall by year 15. So the inspector can note, can't he, that they won't achieve the height of the buildings by year 15. There'll still be a gap of 2 to 4 metres above the tree cover from which one will perceive the tops of the buildings, correct?
Yes, at year 15 we'd anticipate some of the 12 metre high buildings probably above the tops of the trees, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now, mounding. There's reference to mounding in the landscape strategy. Clearly, the specific nature of that mounding is for reserve matters, so neither you nor Mr. Wadsworth can help the inspector with precisely what that mounding would consist of, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. But the inspector will have seen this morning there's mounding to the south of Bedford Road associated with Brackmills, isn't there? There's some bunding there.
There is bunding there, yeah.
Are you responsible for that? Did you do the landscape and visual impact assessment?
I was involved with that scheme, but
okay.
I would just add that the resident that spoke yesterday did refer to the scheme being the village being well protected from the Brackmills development to the west. So
yeah, we all
I'll take
heard
that as a positive. But I was involved with that scheme. But there's certainly just the intention with this scheme is very different. We're not talking about the sort of substantial or the scale of mounding that is associated with that Brackmill scheme to the south on this site. It would be a very different scale in terms of and what we'd sort of put forward. So we're not looking at anything of that order. But thank you for that.
Okay. Now, aside from the mounding that we've established as your responsibility, mounding for screening purposes isn't a local landscape characteristic in the area. There isn't anywhere else where that's present in the immediate vicinity of the site, is there, beyond Brackmills?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, I would just very quickly add, I mean, the intention in this instance would be that we're talking about low sympathetic mounding. I would suggest that we might be up to about 1.5 metres above the sort of existing ground levels, which isn't dissimilar to the road level in certain places. And all that would do is would give, in terms of the proposed planting, it would give that just that extra little bit of height. And I don't think that you would really perceive, given the levels along the road, you wouldn't be read or perceived really as mounding as such.
Okay, well,
but that, I was just sort of making the point. I realise it's a reserve matters point.
Yeah, fine. We'll leave that with the inspector. Just in terms of the removal of the 300 or so metres of tree cover to the south of Bedford Road. Now, just help me with why that's required. My understanding it's required to facilitate the new cycle path. There's cycle path and footway along the south of Bedford Road, correct?
That's my understanding, yeah. I would just be careful about referring to it as tree cover. I think we saw on site this morning, the inspector saw this morning, that
scrub,
just, in terms of what it is, a lot of it's soft-set scrub, brambles and nettles. And but that's my understanding of the reasoning for the removal of that vegetation.
And you referred yesterday to an intention to replace that vegetation, but clearly where it's removed in order to provide a cycle path or a pedestrian route, you can't replace it there. So there is going to be some permanent loss, isn't there?
There'll be some permanent loss of the self-set scrub, nettles, brambles. Yes, there'll be less of those after the scheme.
Okay.
But I don't see that as a particular negative against the scheme in those terms. I mean, we'd anticipate putting back sort of native hedgerow and tree planting, and in many instances would be better than what's being lost.
As in on the within the boundary of the site north of Bedford Road,
So
you're
on
talking about putting in...
I was thinking on the southern side of the road, we'd anticipate that as part of the highway scheme that's put forward, as well as the footway cycleway, you've got a 3 metre wide footway cycleway. Immediately beyond that, subject to where the highway boundary is, you'd expect there to probably to be some fencing, like post and rail fencing, and associated with that there might be a new hedgerow to go in. So again, it's a matter for almost further down the line, but we'd anticipate that there would be a sensible and appropriate landscape scheme that came forward with the highway works on that southern side of the road.
Okay, fine. Moving on then to impact on landscape character during the operational phase. Now, there's no dispute between you and Mr Wadsworth regarding the impact on the character areas taken as a whole. We've established that. The dispute is about the significance of the impact on the site and the immediate context. Now, there was some discussion yesterday about what immediate context constitutes, and Mr Wadsworth says, approximately 1,200 metres, approximately 15 minutes walk. That's his view based on having visited the site, etc. You were asked about this by Mr Goatley. You didn't want to pin it down to any specific distance, but I just want to understand what the nature of the disagreement is between you and Mr Wadsworth on this point. So my understanding from yesterday is that the only point of disagreement that you referred to is that you wouldn't take the immediate context to be as far away from the site as Little Houghton to the east. Is that fair?
It wouldn't go as far as Little Houghton. I think the issue that I take is principally the way that you would define the immediate context of the site by reference to a distance. So, for instance, if the 1,200 metres, that takes you well into the Brackmills estate to the west and all the existing development that's to the west of our site. Now, to suggest that if you went 1,200 metres to the west of our site, that our scheme would have a moderate or a moderate major impact upon the character there, I find sort of quite strange.
Okay.
So I think there's a fairly simplistic thing to understand there, is that if we're going to say it's going to have a moderate or moderate major or whatever the effect would be, I don't think you can just put a distance on it that's going to take you to somewhere where it isn't going to have that impact.
Okay, I take the point. I mean, I don't think Mr Wadsworth is suggesting that standing within Brackmills there'll be some significant adverse impact associated with the appeal site. But just to go back to the point I've asked you about, which is the extent to which the immediate context extends towards Little Houghton, you say it doesn't. I'm interested to understand.
No, I say it does extend in that direction towards Little Houghton.
Okay,
it doesn't extend to Little Houghton.
But
what I'm saying,
where's the cut off?
I mean, that's the issue, just in terms of the immediate context. Cut off sometimes is clearer with certain landscape features than in other areas where landscape features aren't quite so obvious. I think what you'll find with, certainly at a localised and a site-wide scale and its site immediate context scale, landscape effects dissipate almost with distance. So as you move away, they generally dissipate and they reduce. In certain instances, so for instance, to the south of our site, west of our site, where you've got the existing development, as soon as you get into that existing development, our scheme doesn't really have an effect. Whereas to the east of our landscape, where you've got the open fields, there will be an effect, but it will dissipate. So what I'm saying is that, if you to try and pin a line on it, the line goes to the east of our site by, I don't know, it might be a field or two, but it's going in that direction. To the east of our site, which might be, I don't know, 200 or 300 metres.
But you're not suggesting that by the time you get to Little Houghton, there's no impact?
No, I'm not saying there's no impact, but that's where we come back to the scale of the effects that myself and Mr Wadsworth have agreed upon in terms of those wider character areas. So, if you look at that, that's going to be more representative of the effect of the scheme in landscape terms, is to look at the landscape character area that sort of stretches in that direction. So there's there's a whole scale and hierarchy of impacts depending on what scale you're considering the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that you were making yesterday was that the immediate context does not include Little Houghton. The point you're making today is that, well, as I've understood it, is that it might well include Little Houghton, but the scale of effect is lesser.
Sorry, I'm saying that in terms of the immediate context doesn't include Little Houghton. No, I think the immediate context, like I say, probably stretches to the east of our site by a field, possibly two. And then there's a change in the topography. So I recognise that in the field immediately to the east, where we looked at the viewpoint on site this morning from the public right of way, development on our site is going to have an impact there. But the impacts as you sort of go towards, in landscape terms, in landscape character terms, the impacts will dissipate as you move towards Little Houghton to the east.
Okay, and just on that point about change in topography, I mean, I think what I understand by you saying there is that the topography, you go up a slope effectively towards Little Houghton. It sits slightly higher up in the landscape than the appeal site, correct?
Well, probably, yeah, but not straight from our site. I mean, there is that sort of 500 metres, I think Little Houghton's about just over a kilometre away from the edge of our site, and I would say probably halfway across that distance, the land begins to rise, and I think that's where, you could say there is a bit of a change.
But that, I mean, a change in topography might actually make the appeal or the immediate context stretch a further distance, in the sense that one can perceive the site at a lower level from Little Houghton.
But it's almost where you're beginning to, you've got visual impacts and landscape impacts. In character terms, you'd probably say that is a bit more of an obvious change because the topography is changing.
Okay, I mean, I think the inspector's seen the site, so he can come to his own conclusion on that.
Don't disagree at all.
Just in terms of agricultural use, clearly there'd be a permanent removal of the agricultural use of the southern part of the site. Now, in terms of any agricultural or remaining agricultural use of the northern part of the site, that would need, again, to be consistent with the environmental management directed towards the mitigation measures for the SPA, wouldn't it?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
I appreciate you're not an ecologist.
Yep. But my understanding is also that it can continue to be managed, in terms of it can continue to be farmed. But
okay, and then let's move on to public rights of way. So let's have a quick look at CDK 79. That's the public rights of way plan.
It's the last document, I think it's on L21 on the list. I think it's folder 11, part O.
Thank you.
It's just got the wrong CD reference. It's down on the sheet in front of you is L21, but it is the same K79. Also agreed last.
Are you in? Yeah, okay.
I've got a spare one if that helps.
It's that.
Yes, it's that. I think it's been included because I don't think anywhere else in the evidence actually there's a plan showing the particular numbers and letters associated with the public rights of way network. So just looking at that plan, Mr. Jackson, we can see, and obviously you walked some of it this morning, there's a pretty substantial public rights of way network in the vicinity of the site, isn't there?
Yeah, that's a reasonable network, yeah.
And much of it, if you're going along the Nen Way or KU3 or the footpath to the west of Little Houghton, the footpath to the east of Great Houghton Conservation Area, they've all got views of the site at various points, don't they?
Oh, well, in terms of what's shown on the plan, the majority of the routes on here won't have views towards the site. I mean, in terms of the one you've referenced, certainly, well, east of Great Houghton, well, I mean, the inspector's seen this morning, east of Great Houghton, it's variable. Again, west of Great Houghton, again, it's variable. You know, there are some, but then they disappear, and, you know, the extents we looked at this morning.
Yeah, but the Nen Way, KU3, KV15, K16, you can see the site.
You can see the site, yeah. KU3, you can't from KU17, well, you can from a very short section. KV15, you can see it from most of it. KV16, you can see from it.
Yeah.
But I would say it varies in places.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. Okay, so when judging the extent to which the inspector agrees with your view that the site's fairly enclosed, one factor that he'll need to take into account is the extent to which it can be seen and experienced from the public rights of way network.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, now I'd like to have a look at CDA 4.
Before we move on from that, can I just ask a question? In terms of the site visit this morning, we walked along the Hardingstone Dyke, and there's an area that was pointed out to me that isn't a public right-of-way.
Yes.
How would you expect me to treat that in terms of public visibility? Because it obviously had some sort of access rights, but it wasn't a public right-of-way in the sense it was public footpath.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can certainly take it as a publicly accessible route. I mean, as far as I'm aware, it's some sort of agreed permissive route. So I think, that's, you can judge that as, the public can walk along it and view it, and I think therefore, so you could take it in the same sort of manner as the public rights of way.
Thank you for that, that's useful.
Okay, CDA 4, which is the technical appendices to the environmental statement. Something we haven't looked at in the inquiry yet.
Sorry, which one? Sorry,
CDA 4. It's not 4 point something. It's just it's the first one. 4.
Just A4.
It should be within one of the first few folders. It might be.
Yes.
I think it might be the back of the first folder, sir.
Yes, I've got it.
Are you there, sir?
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry.
I'm looking at environmental assessment.
Technical appendices.
Yeah.
So it's not page numbered. The PDF page number is 101 of 129. So, sir, it's the last quarter, towards the last quarter of the document.
Yes, I've got that.
EIA methodology?
I'm afraid not, no. let me see if I can help. It precedes the non-technical summary of the environmental statement, which is the last sort of 20 or 30 pages of that document. Do you want me to help you, sir?
Sections I've got are ES Chapter 3, Site. ES Chapter 4, Reasonable Alternatives. ES Chapter 5, Population. ES Chapter 6, Biodiversity.
I'm not sure you're in the right document.
All right. Okay, no, it's all right. There's 2 sixes in here. Yes, I've got it. It's fine.
Yeah, it's the second
It's just
set.
the 2 and 6s.
Right, that's not very helpful,
Yeah.
I'm afraid. Okay, and then within that document, so this document includes it's the start of the technical appendices, and a few pages in, we've got scoping, ES Appendix A 1.2 scoping correspondence. So this is a section of the ES that relates to the scoping stage. And if you go to the back of that document, around 30 pages from the end, the last part of the document is the non-technical summary.
Sorry, is that where I should be then?
No,
No,
sorry,
right,
you
sorry,
should
yeah,
be
sorry,
at page
sorry.
101
Yeah,
of the PDF.
yeah.
Which is an email from the Ramblers Association. I think it might be the page before that, sir.
That's conclusions.
Can I give you this version? It's
Yeah.
it's not marked at all.
Okay, fine.
So this is an email from so we can see the subject of this email. It says request for EIA scoping opinion for proposed employment scheme land north of Bedford Road, Northampton. So this, I think, is a consultation response from the Ramblers Association to the scoping report. Now, the scoping report that was undertaken was for a larger scale of development than that which is proposed through the appeal scheme. So that's I make that caveat before I ask any questions about this, but the red line of the appeal site is the same. Yeah. So this is an email from David Craddock, the local footpath secretary for the Northamptonshire area, the Ramblers Association. He says in paragraph 2, I note the 9 matters which has been concluded should be included in the ES, and indeed with the location of the site in mind, it's essential that they should be. With the Northampton washlands, which form part of the River Nene Regional Park and a triple SI and special protection area bounding the site to the north, in our view, prima facie, it's difficult to conceive of a more contentious location to site the proposed employment scheme. The proposals seem to us incompatible with the location, and we await with interest to see what mitigation is proposed which could satisfactorily counteract the adverse impacts the development will have. In this regard, it's for others more competent to do so to comment specifically on the possible effects on bird life, but in terms of the impact on the recreational use of the area, this would seem to be considerable. A right-of-way runs to the east of the site into the washlands, and 2 others are also in the vicinity, one entering the washlands from the east and the other running along their northern boundary. An informal footpath runs east-west along the southern boundary adjacent to the site. The washlands are in fact a very popular walking and recreational facility, and the walking routes within the washlands run along the top of quite high bunding. And then he talks about there being a need for mitigation. Now, all of the assessed viewpoints in the submitted landscape and visual impact assessment where the development would be seen from public rights of way all of them were assessed as experiencing a negative effect, weren't they?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So there's no long-term visual effects in relation to the public rights of way network that were deemed to be beneficial.
That's correct.
So I can well imagine you don't agree with the scale of impact that the Ramblers Association suggest would occur, but you must agree with the Ramblers Association in the sense that the impact on users of recreational paths arising from the development will be uniformly negative.
I agree that it will be negative, yes. I think, just to add really, I think in the context of this letter, I think as you've already rightly pointed out, it's different in terms of the, as I understand, in terms of the extent of the development. It may well be very different also in terms of the sort of heights of development or how it might have been interpreted by the Ramblers Association. I mean, if they've just got a red line boundary indicating that development could go pretty much up to the Hardingston Dyke, immediately to the south of the Washlands area, they could well interpret, you know, if there's nothing setting the parameters at that stage on any sort of building heights or the scale of development, if it's simply a red line plan, then that's very different from the scheme that's before us now.
So I think the scoping was for buildings 15 metres in height.
Right, okay.
So
Yeah,
you're quite right that it's not the same as the proposal that's now before the inspector, and I absolutely don't suggest that it is.
No. And I'm not saying that there won't be an adverse impact, but I think clearly there's a long way from this to the scheme that's before us now and the work that's been done and where the development sits. And I would just also say that, you know, in terms of the visual impacts, you know, they've been robustly assessed and include the views from these locations. And I think it's just important to note that the views generally where it's going to be seen, it's going to be seen in the context of the existing Brack Mills development, and certainly just in terms of, I know there's reference to noise. I mean, certainly noise and activity, that the development will sit screening that section of Bedford Road from the Washlands area to the north.
Okay, and I mean the difference between you and Mr Wadsworth on visual effects in relation to both Bedford Road and the public rights of way network, it's all about scale. We'll have to leave the inspector to take a view on that.
Absolutely.
I just want to, and I'm not intending to go through viewpoints and photo montages in any detail, bearing in mind what's been seen this morning, but I just want to pick up a couple of points. The first is in photo montage J, so that's in CDA 4.8, I think.
Yeah.
So it should be figure 10.10 H, I and J.
If we bring back the A3 viewpoints from the site visit, I think that's probably what we're looking for, is the A3 version that we're taking to site this morning. Are they in the room? Give me 30 seconds, I can run across and go get the A3 versions from them.
Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Did you want me to run across and get the large copies for you?
I've got some
I'm
help.
all right with
You're
the.
okay?
Yeah, I've seen this morning, so
Yeah.
I hope I can recall what we've seen this morning. But I can't go through,
So are you at figure 10.10 H?
so not quite, but I will be.
So we can see, Mr Jackson, in terms of the existing view, which you'll all have seen this morning, this is us at KU3, so east of the appeal site, west of Little Houghton, and we can see one of the dark Brack Mills buildings roughly in the middle of that viewpoint, bisected by the pylon.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah.
Yep.
So just going over the page and having another look at that pylon, We then see the spatial extent of the industrial units proposed by the appeal proposal, and we can see they extend much further to the left, to the south, and much further to the north, to the right of that pylon, can't we?
Well, in relation to the pylon, the post, yes, yes.
And in terms of the area to the right of the pylon, we can see there the northern face of the buildings, can't we?
Yes, you can, yes.
And that's where that 5 metre edging would be, so that there isn't an ability to mitigate the effect of the northern face of those buildings due to the restriction on the height of the planting there, correct?
Well, there is to mitigate it, but obviously not to the same in terms of screening the full extent, but often the most important part is the lower part where you've got more active elements around the buildings.
Okay, well the inspector will need to take a view on that. I think we'll leave it there in terms of viewpoints. Everyone's seen the other ones. I don't think there's any purpose in going through them. I'm not going to ask you anything about Bedford Road in terms of viewpoints with that in mind. Just finally, in relation to the separation between Great Houghton and Northampton, let's have a look at, just for reference, the aerial plan, which is at figure 10.2, CDA 4.6. We looked at it with Mr. Wadsworth yesterday. There, sir.
Is that 10.2?
Yes, it is, yeah, revision A. So at present, I mean, when you're travelling, say you're travelling by car into Northampton, coming from the east, coming from, say, Little Houghton, travelling west along Bedford Road, you can obviously see the Bracknell's estate at various points along Bedford Road. But in terms of one's sense of entering into the urban area of Northampton, that really occurs when you hit the Lakeside roundabout, doesn't it?
No, I don't think so. I think you certainly feel as though you're sort of, there's an entry sign some distance to the east of our site that refers to Northampton, and I think at that time you are seeing the buildings at Bracknell's.
Yeah,
so
but in terms of entering into the built area or urban area of Northampton, well, that doesn't happen when you see a sign for Northampton, does it?
But you certainly feel as though you're entering it as you're certainly going past the sort of, I suppose, the turning to Great Houghton, because that's where you've got the Bracknell's buildings very much in front of you. So, I mean, in terms of entering, it's, you're well aware that you're entering an urban area at that point.
Okay, so your view is that when you hit the High Street, the junction of the High Street with Bedford Road, the Great Houghton High Street, that's where the current perception is of entry into the built area of Northampton?
I think if you're looking at a black and white, this is your entry point, then I don't think it's one of those sort of entrances into Northampton. I think, you're aware of it from some distance away, and it's a bit more of a route in, as opposed to trying to define a particular, this is your entry point. I don't think it's one of those entrances along that road.
Okay, so you're not sure, you don't think there is an entry point into Northampton, the built
Well,
area?
no, I do, but some entrances act more as a gateway, and there's an obvious, fairly clear cut, not black and white, but there's an obvious, this is where I'm entering the urban area. I think in other instances, particularly with roads entering settlements, it can vary, and I think it does here, because I think it does, you're aware of it for some distance, and it, I think there's a bit more of a transition into the settlement. But I think, in terms of having development to both sides of you, then that's really when you get to the Lakeside roundabout.
Yeah,
That's, if that's what if you want. I mean, in terms of development both sides, it's at that point.
Okay. So I mean, you say it's not obvious, it's not clear cut, but both development on both sides of you doesn't happen until it gets to Lakeside. That's a matter of fact.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
fine.
yeah.
Okay. Now we can see the red line of the appeal site, and we can obviously, because of the SPA constraints, there won't be development to the north, but there will be that development to the south, running right along to the, I suppose, to the tree belt, 10 metres to the east of the boundary. So the inspector can note that in terms of built development, within that red line, north of Bedford Road, it will extend along to the eastern edge of the appeal site, minus about 10 metres.
yeah. I think in terms of the parameters plan, it's a little bit more than that. I think you've got, isn't there an easement or some sort of drainage easement down that boundary?
Roughly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the closest built development can get to that boundary, I don't know. Yeah, it's. Well, I mean, looks to be closer to 15 metres, but it's in that order. And again, we looked at it on site this morning, so I think the inspector's got a clear view as to how far the development can extend.
Yeah, okay. I mean, just in terms of the aerial view, when we're looking sort of the north-south, the link between Mounding and the appeal site, with the development on the appeal site in place, what's going to separate the built-up area of Great Houghton from the development on the appeal site is Bedford Road and two paddocks. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, there's the parts of the field, the road, and the landscape buffer planting on the edge of our site, which I think we've got at 30 metres at that point.
Good. Okay. And in terms of the perception of the separation, we can leave that to the inspector, given what he's seen today.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I don't have any further questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I've got no further questions either. Mr. Goatley, any re-examination?
Yes, some, if I may. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jackson, you asked some questions regarding the landscape character assessments. I'm not going to go back through all of them, but could I possibly take you please to K48, which is the CBA assessment?
Yes, got that.
Now, you were taken on, I'm looking at this in PDF terms, it was at 18C, it's the last page of the extract, it's page 172, internally numbered, PDF 11 of 11.
Yes.
Can I just make sure I'm on the right
I think that's, it should be K48, sir.
The Northampton Green Landscape Character.
That's correct.
I'm on that, yeah.
And
You said page 172?
it's 172 is its original numbering.
I think it's the document before that, so I think it's the county.
Right.
I think it's the county assessment.
I beg your pardon, it's the county assessment.
Correct, that's what confused.
Northamptonshire, sorry, I do beg your
Yeah,
pardon.
175, there is a 172 in that.
And it's 18C. You were taken to the first paragraph of that in terms of the Nan Dustin Mills Billing Wharf, and you had discussion regarding the first paragraph in particular
Yes.
in terms of the influence of the close proximity of significant areas of urban development and the issue on the communication corridor as well. If I can take you as well also to the last of the paragraphs, the third paragraph. If I can ask you to read that for yourself, please, and in particular the last 5 or 6 lines.
Yes, I can see there clearly. You know, it makes reference to it says that it states the last 5 lines. Settlement is limited within the character area, incorporating only office and industrial development. And then it goes on to say rising land surrounding the floodplain is heavily developed with residential, industrial and commercial development, creating a backdrop to the Broad River Valley floodplain.
For the purposes of landscape character assessment and description, how pertinent, how fair do you think that is for the purposes both of your assessment and that of the inspectors?
Yeah, well, I think that's very fair, and particularly in the context of the site itself, which is, sits immediately adjoining this sort of the development, the sort of office and the industrial developments. So again, in terms of the, I suppose the character, it's that is particularly relevant.
Thank you very much. Now, with regard to the LCT description, I'm going to take you now to K 49, if I may.
Yes.
I'd like to take you, please, PDF terms, it's page 40 of 80. It's page 75 internally numbered. Do you have that?
Yes, we've got that.
You've taken the key characteristics, and I make no quibble that the learned friend has asked you about some, not necessarily all of them, for the purposes of cross-examination. Just for the purposes of this exercise, when one's looking at key characteristics, how would you say that the inspector ought to go about utilising those characteristics separately, individually, collectively, in groups, or just those appropriate to the consideration of any given site?
Well, I think it's collectively, really. I mean, I think you've got to look at all those key characteristics, but the important thing is also it's those key characteristics over, I suppose, the scale of the landscape character area that's being considered. So again, the more detailed ones, those key characteristics are probably focused upon a smaller scale area of land, and at a larger scale it's much more diverse. So I think, again, with all of these published studies, you've got to consider all the key characteristics at the right scale.
Can I ask you about one that you weren't taken to, which was in respect of bullet point 5? I ask you to read that to yourself, commencing hedgerow trees.
Yes.
Going beyond the point that I've just taken you to before and the answer that you've given me, how pertinent or otherwise, in your view, is bullet point 5 for the purposes of assessment of the appeal site? Well,
again, I think it is pertinent. The hedgerow trees and the vegetation in general, they do combine to create some local enclosure, and I think that's I think that comes through in the more detailed study, or these detailed studies. So again, relevant to the site and its context.
Thank you very much. You were asked regarding the A428 and whether it constituted a physical barrier between that which constitutes the appeal site and Brackmills to the south. So far as the question of physical separation, in your view, does it provide that which would be perceived as a physical separation between Brackmills and Premier Inn and Lakeside?
Sorry, just repeat the question again.
The A428,
yep.
In your view, would it provide what may be characterised as a physical barrier between Brackmills and the Premier Inn and Lakeside? which are located to the north.
Yeah, well, it does the same, you know, performs the same function. It stretches between the two, so it's the same context.
Thank you very much. You were taken to CDB3.
Sorry, which one? Sorry.
CDB3,
B3.
which is the illustrative landscape plan.
Yes.
And you were asked regarding the 5-metre high maximum double native hedgerow to be located to the north of the built form. And you were asked if you didn't have the SPA buffer, would you come up with some other form of landscape mitigation in that location?
Yes.
And you indicate that you quite probably might with trees. Your view, please, the inspector's assessment. What's the consequence of not doing so?
Well, not including the trees. I think, in essence, you're going to see a degree more visually of the buildings from to the north. But I think, as I've said, and if you look at certainly the layout that's on B3, what the sort of hedgerow planting would do is it would screen those active elements, the car parking and the service yard, so that it would be effective in terms of certainly visually filtering and screening those parts of the site. Yes, the higher parts of the buildings will remain visible, so you know they'll be more visible, the higher parts in the longer term. But I think that's been taken into account with all the assessment work, and I think you know on balance it doesn't make a really a material difference in the long run.
And the second point was regarding the 15-year time horizon and your assessment with regard to the extent of trees, particularly to the south and to the east of the site, that may well be 8 to 10 metres when the buildings themselves may be at 12 metres, i.e. there may be a difference of between 2 and 4 metres, certainly at year 15. Beyond year 15, what would you anticipate to be the result?
I'd anticipate the trees continuing to grow, such that they would be at 12 metres. Again, subject to species, and it's quite likely in this instance some trees could be up to 12 metres within the 15 years. But yeah, I mean the trees will continue to grow, and there'll be increased sort of filtering and screening of the buildings beyond 15 years.
For the purposes of the inspector's assessment, what, if anything, do you say would turn upon the trees on a more cautious basis, only being, say, 8 to 10 metres at year 15?
I don't think anything turns on it. I mean, I think it's the strategy is that there is appropriate native planting there that will increasingly over time sort of visually sort of filter and soften views towards the buildings. And be they at one height at 15 years or 2 years later at year 17 or some a little bit earlier, I think nothing turns on it. It makes no material difference to the overall visual effects.
Thank you very much. An allied point, but perhaps one just to be clarified, it's CD A 4.8, and it's the photomontages. And I have those at PDF pages 19 through to 21, and this is the series 1010K to J.
I'm sorry, could you give that reference?
Certainly, sir. It's the photomontage J, it's CDA 4.8, PDF 10 of 28, but it's the reference is 10 KIJ.
I'm sorry, is this KU3, the viewpoint to the east of the site?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Again, that's a succession of viewpoints together with the anticipated consequences of planting. What, if anything, do you say the inspector should make of those?
I think that what he can take is that I think in the I suppose short, medium, longer term, the planting that's going to be incorporated into that eastern site boundary is going to effectively filter, soften, screen views to the development. And I think if you look at the existing view at the moment, clearly you've got those open views towards the Brackmills buildings, set further beyond. The development will sit in front of those, and the planting will be appropriate and effective and provide a characteristic filter to the views that you've got from the public footpath there.
Thank you very much. You asked some questions regarding the scoping correspondence. That is that which is at CDA4, PDF 101 of 129. This was the email regarding the Ramblers. Can you recall that?
Yes, I've got that, yeah.
There was a discussion regarding what it was they thought or may have been asked to have in mind for the purposes of their scoping correspondence. Can I ask you to go please to KD 37?
So it's K.
It's KD 37.
Sorry, is this a separate core document?
It's a separate core document. It's the EIA scoping report.
Folder 8, part F.
I'll take K37.
K, right, sorry. I was
Sorry.
trying to KD.
That's right.
K-
Let's be conflating CD and KD.
Right.
K37.
Yes, I've got that.
It's part F and F.
Grateful. That's the EIA scoping report, and we'll see what, obviously I have the frontispiece for that. It's from February 2019, and it sets out within the introduction section 1 what was otherwise being done and anticipated under the EIA. Can I ask you to go to the description of development in section 4, which is page 7 of that document?
Yes, I've got that.
If I could ask you please to have a look at particularly 4.2 and the components that are there, together with those in the bullet points. If you'd like to read them for yourself, and then if you can assist the inquiry on at least a rudimentary compare and contrast.
therefore, looking at that, I mean, certainly not only have we got the, you know, looking at a development up to 15 metres high, it was also considering, again, correct, well, if I'm wrong, I must have misinterpreted, but it looks to be a sizable increase in terms of the employment floor space at that stage over what was ultimately applied for, and also a sizable increase in terms of maximum unit sizes. So it looks as though it was a much bigger scheme, both in terms of building heights, floor space and unit sizes. So yeah, a very different scheme.
So we see that maximum of 80,000 square metres. Remind us, please, what we're dealing with here.
Well, if I've got the reference wrong, I've got the parameters plan in front of me, which refers to 24,000 square metres. So
Broadly, something over 3 times as much.
yes, yeah.
And is that something which, for the purposes of the inspector's assessment, that one would necessarily end up with the same assessment being taken of that which is proposed now, as opposed to that which might have been considered for the purposes of scoping then?
Well, it's clearly now is what the inspector needs to be focused upon.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jackson. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goatley. It's now 3:05. I propose to have the mid-afternoon break now, so if we can come back at 3:20, there's 15 minutes. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you.
if I can. Points well made on your part. Yeah, definitely. It's good.
It was quite mischievous of me, but I just couldn't resist.
It's very good.
Good afternoon. It's now 3:20. The inquiry is resumed. Before we start, I was asked about the Great Houghton Parish Councillor. I'm minded to ask the person to come first thing tomorrow morning. Can I get firstly Mr. Daly?
That sounds fine to me.
And Mr. Goatley?
Provides a mechanism of being able to stop them in and hopefully causing least disruption to anybody.
I thought that as well. So if we said 9:40 tomorrow or 9:30 tomorrow, yeah, because I think I was told that he or she could only make during school hours, doing non-school, during school hours. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We now move on to the heritage evidence, and we're going to hear first the council's evidence, and that's Mr. Adam Partington and Ms. Daly.
Thank you very much. Just the usual in terms of documents that will be required. It's a much smaller list than Mr. Jackson's cross-examination. It's Mr. Partington's proof of evidence, which is CDL 18. It's his heritage impact assessment, which is at CDK 75. Good. And then we'll look at some of the photo montages in CDA 4.7 and 4.8. Yeah. Good. Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Partington.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask you to turn up your proof of evidence, please, at the introduction section? And just by means of introduction, you tell us that you are a partner in the heritage team at Marins, a position you took up in December of last year. Previously, you were director of Locus Consulting, which is a heritage consultancy which you established in 2012. You hold a first-class Bachelor of Arts degree with joint honours in Geography and Archaeology from Nottingham University and a Master of Science with distinction in Professional Archaeology from Oxford University.
That's correct.
And you tell us you've worked exclusively in the heritage sector since 2006. And you tell us a little bit more about that experience at paragraph 1.3. At 1.4, you tell us that you work, through your work for Marins, it's both nationally but predominantly in the East Midlands. And you have, over the course of your career, developed specialisms in characterisation, historic farmstead assessment, setting analysis, urban design, strategic policy and development management of all scales of projects in both rural and urban contexts. And you also tell us at 1.5 that whilst you were a director of Locus Consulting, you ran a 5-year training scheme on behalf of Historic England, building capacity amongst local authority practitioners on key planning topics, including significance, heritage information, constructive conservation, heritage and planning, and the setting of heritage assets. Is that all correct?
That is correct, yes.
Good. Then turning to the scope of your evidence, that's set out at, over the page, paragraphs 1.14 to 1.19. I won't read that out, but in summary, what your evidence does is address the potential effects of the appeal scheme on known heritage assets, in particular the 2 conservation areas and the 2 Grade 2 star listed churches in Great Houghton and Little Houghton. Correct?
That is correct.
Good. Now, just a point of, there's a correction that I understand you wish to make to your heritage impact assessment. So that's at CDK 75.
That is correct. There is a false caption, sir, for which I apologise. Figure 17 states that it's view 8 looking south across the site from the Hardingstone embankment. In fact, that view on page 42 is to the east of the Great Houghton Conservation Area, looking northwest towards the site. I believe it's from footpath KU1.
I remember the position well, yeah.
Good. Okay, now with that out of the way, the first topic is matters of approach. And there's just one question I'd like to ask you about, and that's in relation to the calibration of harm, or assessing where the harm falls. Now, I'd just like to understand where you, appreciating this isn't a case where substantial harm is assessed, but where you consider substantial harm to be pitched by reference to, for example, the planning practice guidance, and how that assists you in coming to views on less than substantial harm and levels of less than substantial harm.
I understand. I'm principally guided by the frameworks, paragraphs 200, 201 and 202, in respect to substantial harm being a high test. And subsequent to that, I'm guided by planning practice guidance, paragraph number 18, which refers to substantial harm as affecting a key element of significance. And as a useful yardstick, I have included in the rear of my heritage impact assessment, which is K75, CDK75, a definitions of impact table. This is my own work, and it's intended to assist you as a decision maker. It is a useful yardstick and not intended to be anything other than that.
Good. Okay, is there anything else you want to say about calibration of harm or levels of harm?
Not in this instance, no, thank you.
Fine. Okay, now in terms of the rest of your evidence in chief, what I propose to do is take each of the 4 assets in turn and ask you a few questions about each. So turning firstly to the Great Houghton Conservation Area, can I ask you please to summarise what you see as being the key elements of significance that are of relevance to the consideration of the impact of the appeal proposal?
Yes, indeed. So my assessment has been guided by the Great Houghton Conservation Area appraisal, which manages to summarise some of the key aspects, and I've highlighted those within my proof at 4.9 in the proof. And that is that Great Houghton is a rural village with a strong history of agriculture and farming within its economy. It has a fine assemblage of vernacular buildings. It takes a traditional linear form, which is common to many villages in the area, and that it has very nice sylvan qualities by virtue of its wooded character. And a particular point that is raised is that it is appreciated as detached from the built-up area of Northampton, and that is identified as a key element of its significance within the Great Houghton Conservation Area appraisal. The area appraisal also notes the topographic location of Great Houghton Conservation Area midway up the slope of the south side of the Nen Valley, and this enables views from the conservation area and to the north, and to the conservation area from the north. And these views are again highlighted as important elements of the conservation area's significance, and the ability to appreciate the significance of the village from the north and its significance as a rural village, again its detached nature in respect of the built edge of Northampton and the landmark qualities of the Grade 2 star listed church that sits at its centre.
Thank you very much. And in terms of the contribution of the appeal site to the setting of Great Houghton Conservation Area and its significance, can you help the inspector with what your summary is of that contribution? It might be helpful to do that by reference to some of the photo montages. Is there one you'd like to go to first?
Yes, thank you. So if I could direct you, sir, to CDA 4.8 and photo montages P and J, they're towards the rear of the document. If I take J first and then followed by P, that would be useful.
Where are they? Sorry, Mr. Portis, is it J first?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much. So both of these views relate to views of the Great Houghton Conservation Area from the north, J being from footpath KU3 to the east of the appeal site, and P being from the far north, adjacent the A45, north of the conservation area, with views of the conservation area from the north. These views, in my opinion, contribute to the significance of the conservation area. They enable our appreciation of the village as a detached element from Northampton, provide a rural setting for the village, and enable us to appreciate its linear form and topographic setting and landmark spire. In relation to the site's contribution to these views, the photo montages very clearly show that it forms part, an extensive part, of the fore and midground of these northerly views from the Hardingstone embankment and indeed the A45 corridor to the north, and from footpath KU3 to the east of the development site.
Thank you. And then you also refer in your proof to the view taken to the east of the Great Houghton Conservation Area, the correction that you've just made in your heritage impact assessment. So if we can have a look at that as well. I think it's viewpoint, there isn't a photo montage, it's viewpoint H.
It is, thank you. Yes, this does relate to the corrected caption. So immediately east of the Great Houghton Conservation Area, there are views of the conservation area, the easterly edge of the conservation area, in conjunction with the site, and the site forms a rural backdrop to these views, which make a positive contribution to the ability to appreciate Great Houghton as a rural village within its rural setting.
Thank you. Now, one of the points you make relates to what you refer to as the shared genesis of Little Houghton and Great Houghton, and you talk about being able to see the two villages in tandem from various viewpoints to the north of the appeal site. Can you just help with what you mean by the shared genesis of those two villages?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, if possible, like to draw attention to another core document, which is the Little Houghton Conservation Area Appraisal. So that is K23.
Sorry, could you give me that reference again?
I beg your pardon, sir. K23. And page 10 of that document, under the title History and Development. Super. So whilst I accept that Great Houghton and Little Houghton are now two separate settlements, they do share an early history together and were known in the Domesday Book as set out under 4.4 on page 10 as Houghton. or Houghton, in the Domesday Book of 1086. And I note also that if turning over to page 11 of the same document and the second paragraph on this page, that an endowment was made in 1673 by Mr. William Ward to his son for the continued maintenance of a school, and that 8 poor boys from Little Houghton and 4 from Great Houghton should attend that school. So it seems to me that they're at an early stage in their history, sir. The Houghtons enjoyed a common partnership, if you like, as villages within the landscape. They have definitely evolved now as 2 separate settlements, but of course share the same name, which I believe was taken from the same individual, one of the lords of the manor, William de Houghton. That's on page 10, paragraph 3 of the same document, the Conservation Area Appraisal. It's not a point that I'd labour, but at the same time they have an interesting and appealing history within the landscape, and this is appreciated from the low-lying areas of the Nen Valley, where we see both settlements together overlooking low-lying ground, which they would have farmed together.
Thank you very much. The impact of brack mills, so a slightly different topic now. Can I ask you to explain your view as to the impact of the brack mills site, both in general and in terms of the recently constructed development on the former Howden site, on the baseline view pre-appeal proposal?
Yes, so the eastern edge of the Brack Mills industrial estate, which includes a number of buildings, is observable within views of Great Houghton from the north. I would state that currently those buildings are a peripheral, or observed peripherally within the view, specifically from the north and from the east of Great Houghton, and that they currently are detrimental to the character of views of Great Houghton that otherwise make a positive contribution to its setting and significance.
Thank you. And then turning to the impact of the appeal proposal on the significance of the conservation area, or the ability to appreciate that significance. My understanding from your proof of evidence is that you've got 3 key points. The first is an impact on the character of the views. Second is an impact on the views in tandem of Great Houghton and Little Houghton. And third is the impact on the separation of Great Houghton from Northampton. Just taking those 3 in turn, can you just help the inspector with what your summary view is as to the impact on significance?
The summary view in total, in terms of my conclusion, would be that the significance of the conservation area will experience less than substantial harm towards the middle of the scale, and that there would be a degree of cumulative harm with the proposed development seen from the north within views of the Great Houghton Conservation Area in conjunction with the existing buildings at Brack Mills Industrial Estate.
And then dealing with each of the points in turn, so the impact on the character of the views, what are you talking about there?
Yes, that's what I was talking about there. In terms of the detached nature of the Great Houghton Conservation Area, excuse me, from the built-up extents of Northampton, the proposed development would further extend the built-up area of Northampton by some 550 metres into the rural setting of the conservation area, and that would be detrimental to appreciate a core element of its significance. The third point would be, as we observed today, from the Hardingstone embankment and its western end, where the Great Houghton Conservation Area and Little Houghton Conservation Area can be seen in tandem, the extent and character of those views would be detrimentally reduced, in bringing about an impact upon their significance.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, you don't identify any impact on significance arising from views taken from the conservation area towards the site?
That is correct. I would agree with the appellant in that respect.
Good, okay. Unless there's anything else you want to say on the Great Houghton Conservation Area, I suggest we move on to St Mary's Great Houghton. So it's the same set of questions, really. In terms of significance, can you assist, please, in terms of what you say are the key elements of significance that are of relevance to the consideration of the impact of the appeal proposal?
Yes, indeed. So this is obviously shares much in common with the Great Houghton Conservation Area experience, that the mid-18th century church, which was built in a classical style and has a very distinctive spire atop a Tuscan peristyle, is observed within southerly views from areas north of Great Houghton. That includes from the site and over the site. Views of this, the distinctive designed aesthetic of the Grade 2 style listed building, make a positive contribution to its setting and significance, and its value as a place of worship within the wider agricultural landscape. It also highlights, these views also enable appreciation of its landmark qualities within the Nen Valley.
Thank you. And in terms of the contribution of the site, what do you say that is?
The site makes a positive contribution to the setting and significance of the Grade 2 style listed church, sir. It enables views serving as a foreground from the Hardingstone embankment and forms part of a rural foreground from footpath KU3 to the east of the site, where the peristyle and spire can be appreciated and where the church can be appreciated within its village setting within the wider Nen Valley.
Thank you very much. And in terms of the impact of the appeal proposal on significance or ability to appreciate significance, a summary of your position, please.
Excuse me. The proposed development would reduce and visually detract from positive views of the church from the north, from the Hardingstone embankment and KU3, and as a second point, due to their scale, by virtue of their scale, massing and form, the proposed development would lead to a loss of prominence that the church spire currently enjoys within its wider landscape setting and its village setting.
Good, thank you very much. And just to be clear again, there's no point taken by you about views from the church across the site, is there?
That's correct.
Good, okay, and then moving on to the Little Houghton Conservation Area, it's broadly similar set of questions, so that just assist please in terms of what you say are the key elements of significance that are of relevance to us in this appeal.
Again, in some ways similar to the Great Houghton Conservation Area, Little Houghton is a rural village centred on the Grade 2 star Church of St Mary, and it is detached from Northampton. Again, this evidence is well set out within the Little Houghton Conservation Area appraisal. It takes a nucleated form, which is remarkable in comparison to other linear settlements, predominantly linear settlements in the area, and has a rich history of farming history, as we observe today with the multiple farms within the centre of the village. It also occupies a strategic location on a topographical high point adjacent the River Nen, which is believed to be the foundation for the village and the settlement in this location.
Good, okay, and then in terms of the contribution of the site to the setting and the ability to appreciate the significance of the conservation area, can I please have your view? And I think it might be helpful to look at some of the viewpoints again, so perhaps starting with viewpoint B. That's one of the viewpoints from Bedford Road.
Yeah. So that's CDA 4.7. Okay. Fine. So by virtue of... I beg your pardon.
B.
B. Yep. Okay, so by virtue of its topographical location, the conservation area and church within it enjoys a degree of prominence, which is enjoyed from the west of the conservation area where the site lies. These westerly areas possess a clearly agricultural and rural quality that forms a positive foreground to the setting of the conservation area from the west. The site forms a positive element of that rural foreground, where we see the Church of St Mary in Little Houghton as pictured in viewpoint B. I believe this is just by the side of the road that we observed today, by the side of the Bedford Road.
And just in terms of views from the west, is this viewpoint or this position on Bedford Road, is this the only view that you say is makes a positive contribution to the ability to appreciate significance, or are there others?
No, there are others. Where we park today, which I believe is possibly viewpoint A. Yet, although it doesn't show it particularly where we looked from the viewpoint from, but to the rear of the Premier Inn, where we started our walk today, also makes looking over the site from the west, makes a positive contribution to the setting and significance of the Great Houghton Conservation Area within a distant view. And also those views are similarly experienced from the Hardingstone embankment, and I presume they are also experienced from the site, although I have not gained access from the site to the site itself.
Okay, and then moving away from looking at the conservation area from the west, let's have a look at photo montage L, where you're standing with the conservation area behind you, looking to the west. We can...
CDL9 is the updated photo montage from viewpoint L.
Mr. Jackson's proof?
It is indeed. So these views are from the western edge of Little Houghton Conservation Area, again within the conservation area appraisal, which I am happy to point to again. They are a valued view and considered to make a high positive contribution to the significance of the conservation area. Within the view, we see a very deep rural foreground, which the site features within and forms part of at the westerly end of that view, before passing on to the built-up extents of Northampton and the Brackmills Industrial Estate.
And just help with what's your view as to the impact of Brackmills, both in general and the recently constructed development we can see on the former Howden site?
The impact of the Brackmills Industrial Estate within this view, sir, and others from the western edge of the conservation area, forgive me, has been detrimental, but nonetheless there remains an extensive tract of agricultural land that enables us to appreciate the significance of Little Houghton Conservation Area as a rural village with a primarily agricultural economy in historic times.
Good, thank you. And then in terms of the impact of the appeal proposal on significance, or the ability to appreciate significance of the conservation area, I think again, as with the Great Houghton Conservation Area, you've got 3 points, 3 key points. Can you just help with what those are in summary?
Yes. So the proposed development would reduce and visually detract from positive views of the conservation area from the west, and that includes from the Bedford Road, the Hardingstone embankment and the Lakeside development. The proposed development would also reduce and visually detract from views of the Little Houghton and Conservation Area and the Great Houghton Conservation Area together from the western end of the Hardingstone embankment and presumably the site. And the proposed development would also join and in conjunction with further detract from the character and extent of rural views from western edges of the Little Houghton Conservation Area, bringing about together a less than substantial harm at the lower end of the scale to the significance of the conservation area.
And just help with this, you've identified mid-level of the scale for Great Houghton Conservation Area and St Mary's Great Houghton, and then lower end of the scale for Little Houghton, and as can be seen in your proof for St Mary's Little Houghton. Just help with why the difference?
This comes down in part through an important factor within Good Practice Advice Note 3, which is Historic England's guidance on assessing the setting of heritage assets, and proximity is a key factor within that. And clearly the proposed development has a very different proximity to the Great Houghton Conservation Area and church therein as compared to the Little Houghton Conservation Area and church therein, sir. And moreover, as we can see here, by virtue of that, within viewpoint CDL9, so viewpoint L, is that a fair degree of the rural foreground of views away from the conservation area would be retained. And also, seeing as the development is behind the observer when Little Houghton is viewed from footpath KU3, views of the Little Houghton Conservation Area would be sustained over a albeit reduced, rural setting. For that reason, I find low harm, less than substantial harm to the Little Houghton Conservation Area, whereas by virtue of its scale and relationship with Great Houghton, and specifically the reduction of the sense that Great Houghton is a village detached from the built-up area of Northampton, I find that there would be a relatively elevated degree of harm, and that this would be around the middle of the scale to the Great Houghton Conservation Area. I also find that due to the aspect of the conservation area, as it's located on a southern side of the Nen Valley, which descends to the north, views of the church at Great Houghton are only really appreciated from the northern side of the cardinal axis. That spreads east and west along the Hardingstone bank, but within the wider landscape, views of the church are not experienced, for instance, from the east, south or west. They are only experienced from the north. And again, aspect is something that's raised within the Good Practice Advice Note 3 by Historic England. And due to the limited views of the church over the site and the development of the site that would remove or visually detract from a great number of those views, if not all of them, I find that there would be a moderate degree of less than substantial harm to the setting and significance of the Grade 2 star Church of St Mary at Great Houghton.
Good, and then coming back to the Little Houghton Conservation Area, as a matter of logic, in terms of identifying some harm or some adverse impact on significance in respect of the Great Houghton Conservation Area as a result of the reduction of the views of the two villages in tandem, the same point applies to the Little Houghton Conservation Area, is that?
Yes, that's correct. They apply equally. Again, it's not a point that I think is worth labouring. I think there is a view where we appreciate the two settlements together. It's a view that has a value within the landscape, and that view will be largely lost when you can actually, within the same field of view, see the two settlements together. Again, as we experienced today when walking west along the Hardingstone embankment.
Thank you very much. And then moving on to St Mary's Little Houghton, the key elements of significance that you would like to draw the inspector's attention to, please.
I think the key element of significance is the architectural and historic interest of the church as a 13th century, originally but heavily rebuilt 19th century church with vernacular construction and its distinctive tower that appears to its western front, which overlooks land to the west, including the site, and its communal value as a place of worship and a place of community. I believe teas are available this Sunday at 12:30, according to the site visit, unless I observed wrongly. And it occupies a very prominent and elevated position that looks over the Lower Nen Valley, and views of its architectural interest from the west make a positive contribution to the significance of the Grade 2 star listed building, and enables us to appreciate its architectural and historical interest at the centre of a rural village.
And so in terms of the site's contribution to setting and the ability to appreciate significance, is it the same sorts of points as in relation to the views of the conservation area more generally? So from Bedford Road, Hardingstone Embankment to the rear of the Premier Inn?
That is correct, yes. So the church tower is observed in a similar way to the conservation area from the Bedford Road, from the site itself, I'm assuming, although I haven't been granted access, and the lakeside area where we started, as well as the Hardingstone Embankment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And you, I think you referred to the fact that from within the church grounds you can't see out towards the site, so you're not taking any point about impact on significance of views from the church, are you?
That is correct. I've craned my neck in as many directions as I possibly could and couldn't see the site from the churchyard.
Fine, okay. And then in relation to the impact of the appeal proposal, can you please assist on your key points or point?
I think, again, similar to the Little Houghton conservation area, the proposed development would reduce the extent and visually detract from the character of views of the western front of the church from western areas, including the Bedford Road, Hardingstone Embankment, the site itself, and the lakeside development. And these views make a positive contribution to its significance. The reduction and erosion of views would, in my mind, bring about a less than substantial degree of harm at the lower end of the scale.
Good, okay. Is there anything else that you would wish to raise in respect of any of the 4 designated heritage assets at this stage?
Not at this stage, no, thank you.
Fine, now just going back to your proof, we can see your conclusions and positions set out in section 5. Can I just ask you please to read out the implications of your conclusions for the decision maker, which is set out at paragraphs 5.3 to 5.5?
Yes, I apologise first and foremost that there are a lack of page numbers in this document. So the position is, in bringing about a degree of harm to the setting and significance of the Grade 2 star listed buildings of the Church of St Mary the Virgin, Great Houghton, and the Church of St Mary the Virgin, Little Houghton, the proposed development conflicts with the statutory objective of section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. In bringing about a degree of harm to the setting and significance of the Great Houghton and Little Houghton conservation areas and their incumbent Grade 2 star listed churches, the proposed development conflicts with policies 189 and 197 of the MPPF and policies S10 and B and 5 of the West Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy Local Plan Part 1, adopted December 2014, policies Q1 and ENV6 of the Northampton Local Plan Part 2, policies GHN DP 1, 2 and 6 of the Great Houghton Neighbourhood Development Plan, and policies HE5 and HE6 of the South Northamptonshire Local Plan. In accordance with paragraphs 200 and 202 of the MPPF and bearing in mind the statutory objectives of section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 and the great weight that should be afforded to the conservation of heritage assets according to paragraph 199 of the MPPF, the harm should be clearly and convincingly justified and the degree of less than substantial harm then outweighed by the public benefits of the proposed development in order for permission to be granted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Partington. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Partington, and thank you, Ms. Daly. Mr. Goatley.
So, thank you very much.
Mr. Partington, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Partington, can I first commence, if we may, to look at approach to calibration, and you very fairly set out earlier that essentially your approach to calibration is one which is in many ways based upon your K75 assessment and the table that you have set out there, which is at page 72 of that document. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, clearly, the inspector himself can come to a wholly different assessment of calibration.
Clearly he may, sir, yes.
Now, in terms of those definitions of impact, those are your definitions. I'm not going to be critical that you have applied your own definitions, but just to understand what those definitions are, and are those themselves identified or derived in any statute, policy or guidance?
No, they are not, sir.
Now, there is a principal difference, isn't there, between substantial harm and less than substantial harm?
Yes, sir, there is.
And that principal difference is one set out within the NPPF. I'm happy for us to go to it if need be, but the essential upshot of that distinction between them is that if it's substantial harm, no, you can't do it, because what you're dealing with is, in effect, the destruction of buildings.
That's an extreme interpretation of paragraph 201 of the NPPF, sir, but there are few developments that seem to reach the bar of the 4 tests set out by that paragraph of the NPPF.
Yeah. So the upshot from that is that most development where one is considering whether there are impacts, whether they are physical impacts or whether there are impacts or development within the setting of any such buildings, are likely to be the subject of consideration under the heading of less than substantial harm.
Not necessarily, sir. I do not have a tracker on the number of cases that have been branded as less than substantial harm or substantial harm available to me. In my experience, the majority of cases would be classed as less than substantial harm indeed, but I would point you towards paragraph 200 of the NPPF, excuse me, and 201, that substantial harm can indeed arise from the setting, from impact upon the contribution that setting makes to significance. That's paragraph 200, I beg your pardon.
It doesn't rule it out within the, effectively, list that's provided within parentheses.
Forgive me if I could ask for a different interpretation of your question.
Yeah, it doesn't rule out that some development in the setting of a building could be regarded as being substantial.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah. For instance, if you were to build something of the scale of the Shard immediately behind Buckingham Palace when viewed from Admiralty Arch, one might get a slightly different view as to whether that's substantial or less than substantial.
The Champs-Élysées and the Eiffel Tower would equally qualify, I believe, sir, yes.
Ah, but they're French.
They'd never do it.
So that's different. We have enough difficulties today. I think we should stay with the NPPF and the English planning system, if we may. So, the essentials on the less than substantial harm issue that we need to have regard to, which is within 202, as much as anything else, relates to where one is in a calibrated form. And the calibration for less than substantial harm will go from something which is just above no harm, because it's sufficiently negligible, all the way up to something which is just less than substantial harm.
Logically so, sir, yes.
Yeah. Is there anything in that particular characterisation which you find offence with?
No, sir, I'm not offended.
Well, the afternoon is still young, but let's keep going. Okay, so no offence with that, but the reason for logically trying to mark this out is that when one is carrying out an exercise in looking to what is either negligible or no harm or less than substantial harm, the way that some of these matters are characterised is quite important.
I agree, sir.
And similarly, if one is heading away from the lower end of the spectrum of less than some substantial harm to setting, then in those circumstances, or rising from significance to setting, I'm going to use a short form if I may for those purposes, when one's looking at that, one has to be quite careful about not elevating the weight that's attributable to those features in arriving at a view as to whether or not the impact by way of harm is perhaps overstated.
I'm not sure I follow the logic, sir, in as much as heading away from less than substantial harm. My evaluation and assessment has concluded moderate harm in 2 instances, and I wasn't heading away or towards less than substantial harm at the lower end of the scale in any particular way.
Well, essentially, less than substantial harm, when one gets to it, when you head towards the middle of the scale, taking our notional position of going from negligible or just above negligible at one end and just below substantial harm at the other, one has to be careful about how those calibration exercises are undertaken, yes?
I would agree that the process of calibrating the degree of less than substantial harm needs to be undertaken in a careful manner. Again, I am not heading towards one conclusion or another until I've undertaken my assessment, and in this case my assessment has been based on the elements of significance that would be impacted upon, and that has guided me towards the scale of less than substantial harm that I've concluded with. I was never headed in one direction or starting from one particular place. I evaluated whether or not it was substantial or less than substantial harm in each case for each asset, and then concluded in each case the degree of less than substantial harm on the basis of my assessment of significance, contribution of the site and setting to that significance, and the proposed development, sir.
Thank you. Page 71, 72 of K75, if we may.
K75, 71, 72. Yes.
Now, the contribution to significance and or setting, your first on page 71 is a table that goes from neutral through minor, moderate, high and very high.
That's correct, sir.
Those contribution characterizations, do those then have a bearing in terms of the impact exercise which appears on the next page, or are they just wholly freestanding?
They do have a bearing, sir, on the impact page, on page 72, yes.
And that impact is one that whether or not, in terms of significance, there is a characterization in terms of the setting and its contribution, and whether its setting and its contribution then leads into an assessment of what the level of harm is.
It is a characterization, sorry, for sake of clarity, the contribution to significance and or setting is a characterization of those elements of significance that may be impacted upon, and reading into paragraph 18 of the PPG, we are advised that whether the adverse impact seriously affects a key element of its special architectural or historic interest in relation to substantial harm, this is. And therefore, my understanding, as guided by paragraph 18, is that I should understand the significance of a heritage asset and those aspects of its significance that will be impacted upon by a proposed development when coming to an understanding of the degree of harm, if any, that arises from a proposed development.
Well, I'll come back to that in a moment, if I may, in terms of looking at what some of the elements of the guidance are. Because again, your contribution table, page 71, that I think we agreed, that's your characterisation again.
That is my yardstick indeed, yes sir.
Now, the inspector obviously is not bound to follow that for the reasons that we've already discussed and agreed, and the inspector may come to a different view. But to the extent that he derives assistance from what's contained therein and seeking to apply any of the criteria in there, it would be open, if one is looking at the contribution features, for the inspector to reach a different view as to any of those colour-coded contribution characteristics.
I would agree, sir. It is up to you.
Now, if he were to take the view that in respect of any of the relevant components that are, or sorry, any of the relevant assets here, of which there are 4, that either there was no clear or known contribution, or to take the minor heading, modest and positive aspect of a heritage significance makes a valued but unexceptional contribution to the experience of a heritage asset significant from within its setting, then it would be surprising if the inspector were to go higher than the lowest end of the less than substantial harm, or indeed no harm at all.
Forgive me, so I didn't quite track the entire of that question. I apologise because I
Not
know
at
it was a
all.
lengthy one.
It is a lengthy one, but I'm trying to, okay, I'll break it down. Taking your page 71,
Yes, sir.
the inspector could consider that for some of the aspects, that with regard to contribution to significance, rather than just simply whether you can view a particular feature or not, that it makes no clear or known contribution. If it was neutral in terms of contribution, then one would expect there to be no finding of harm.
I would agree, sir. Yes.
Taking up to minor, modest and positive aspect of a heritage asset's significance makes a valued but unexceptional contribution to the experience of a heritage asset's significance within its setting, then again that would be at highest, that would be low. Would you agree?
Logically, yes, sir. Yes, I would agree.
If one moves to the issue of moderate contribution and the significance, that is a site forms from a notable and positive element. So we've got 2 particular features which you have identified there, one notable and secondly positive, and the 2 of them have to be conjoined for the purposes of assessment.
Yes, sir. I would conjoin those.
An alternative is notable contribution to the experience of a heritage asset's significance from within its setting.
Yes, sir. I would read that as notable positive, obviously, in the extent that this takes a moderate contribution to significance.
Now, can I just ask, and it may well be what was intended here, the or at the end of the first line, should that be an and for the purposes of assessment?
So we use this framework, sir, for when we are looking at direct and indirect impacts upon the significance of heritage assets. And as such, the explanation therein that's meant to assist the reader is talking about impacts upon significance and the experience of significance. I appreciate that setting forms part of significance, but it was looking to tease those things apart. As I say, this is my own yardstick, intended to assist the reader only. Within the industry, regrettably, we don't have a specific agreed framework for identifying contribution or less than substantial harm.
Right.
And
So,
as a result, it's to aid you in that respect, sir.
beg your pardon. Just to understand, in context of...
Sorry, Mr. Goodley, before we move on, I'm not sure the witness answered the question.
No,
I'm quite interested to know whether it should be an under or at the end of that first paragraph.
So I'm happy to leave it for you to
Yeah.
clarify.
So, forgive me, this is in moderate, is it?
It is under moderate.
Thank you. A site forms a notable and positive element of a heritage asset or makes a and or would do fine. Yes, I will edit for future use.
and or provides a degree of potential confusion on that. First of all, the site forms a notable and positive element of a heritage asset. If one's looking at a setting case of a piece of land which may be some way removed as the appeal site, are you saying that the site forms, as in the appeal site, forms a notable and positive element of the heritage asset? Or are you saying it makes a notable contribution to the experience of the asset's significance?
I am suggesting that if we look to minor, for instance, and I don't want to detract away from moderate at all, but you'd notice that the language for minor is a site forms a modest and positive aspect of a heritage asset's significance. And in this case, moderate should read, I apologise, a site forms a notable and positive element of a heritage asset's significance and or makes a notable contribution to the experience of a heritage asset's significance from its setting.
Beg your pardon. So do we need to rewrite what moderate says?
To a minor degree, so it's consistent with minor and high, which share the same formula. It's just been missed out. It's a typo, sir. I do apologise.
Okay, just want to understand, in which case, can you give that to me by way of, give that to the inquiry, by way of what that amendment is? So if you can take it in dictation speed rather than
I beg your pardon?
Fire speed, what you think moderate actually may mean.
So moderate should read, a site forms a notable and positive element of a heritage asset's significance or makes a notable contribution to the experience of a heritage asset's significance from within its setting.
Okay, so just to understand what that's telling the reader trying to apply what's there, it's a notable and positive element of the heritage asset's significance or makes a notable contribution to the experience from within its setting. Explain to me what the first one is in contradistinction to the second, because I'm not quite sure I understand.
So in respect of the two parts of the statement, a site forms a notable and positive element of a heritage asset's significance refers to its contribution, say, for a listed building, to its architectural and historical interest, or in this case of a conservation area, its character and appearance. The second, which is more derived from the MPPF's definition of setting and the ability to appreciate the significance of a heritage asset from its surroundings, makes a notable contribution to the experience of a heritage asset's significance from within its setting. There is a similar language within the MPPF's definition of setting.
Yeah, it's not the same though, and that's the reason why I want to try and understand what this is telling us. Does the first part, and it may well be this is a uniform characterisation you apply, does the first part have any application to this site, or are what you're talking about is the second part only?
I would agree, sir, that it's not a matter of agreement, it's a question. It's the second part that applies to this site in particular, in respect of each of the four heritage assets, with one exception, which is the Little Houghton Conservation Area and the view from its western edge, which is said to form a important, in this case, part of the significance of the character and appearance of the conservation area.
So, none of your contribution classifications would deal with your Little Houghton Conservation Area.
The view out of the Little Houghton Conservation Area.
Well, just utilising the wording which is in there, the wording that you applied for Little Houghton's Conservation Area doesn't fall within any of these descriptors.
in as much as the site is not within the conservation area.
No, because you're talking about it is an important part, and that doesn't fall within any of these descriptors.
So the view from the western edge of the Little Houghton Conservation Area is set out to be an important view. The site forms a component part of that view and is a positive part of that view, and therefore I would draw it into, in terms of contribution, the high area of this chart on 71, table on 71, page 71.
So you take those into high. So therefore it goes into the orange, the high orange category.
Between moderate and high, yes, it's a notable and positive element, positive part of a heritage asset significance, part of that view.
Just dealing with the western end of Little Houghton's conservation area, that's a view out from that conservation area.
There are multiple views, yes, sir, from the western edge.
Right, well, I'm not going to trespass over that. I've done those views myself. You've done those views today. But you're talking about a view out from there, and that is a view out in which you would be looking essentially something akin to viewpoint L. It's not viewpoint L, but something akin to it.
I believe it, yes, something akin to viewpoint L, yes, sir.
As I say, that's sufficient for purposes of asking the question. The inspector can assess, because he's obviously been out on site with you this morning, as to what it is, but that is only going to be, in respect of that view, that's a wide panoramic view, yes?
It's a series of views from the western edge of the conservation area that enjoy the Nen Valley is a broad view. It is expansive, yeah. Sure.
Whether you take it from one place or multiple places, unless from any of those multiple places it's obscured by an intervening feature within the near ground, then they're all essentially panoramic views, aren't they?
Well, not panoramic, sir, no.
You don't, well, again, I'll leave that as a matter for the inspector. They are very wide views, which are for the viewer looking in a westerly direction. You have an area which goes essentially from south through to north. How it's intervened, what you can see, may depend upon a whole variety of conditions. Yes?
Yes, so the view is limited by the north and south extents of the Nen Valley and the built-up area of Northampton.
Yeah, well, leave the inspector to make that assessment and whether panoramic is an appropriate descriptor or not. It's a wide range view. So far as that which is on the appeal site is concerned, or maybe on the appeal site, is one small component of that very much larger view. Would you agree?
I believe it is certainly a component of the view. It's not necessarily a small part of the view, and more importantly, it's a relatively larger, although still modest, part of the positive element of the view, which is the rural character of that view. So not all parts of that view are positive, not all elements of the view are positive, sir. It's the rural character of that view, which the site has and contains, as do the intervening fields, which I believe brings benefit to the view.
Right. Again, matter for the inspector as to the elements he finds in that view, but that which is in viewpoint L is not an unfair element to identify that which will be a part of the new built form if the appeal site is permitted development, having regard to the building which is behind it.
It's, in my view, sir, it's not an unsubstantial addition to the view. The proposed development would not be an unsubstantial addition to the...
Okay. I'm not going to get excited by that. The inspector can make his own judgment.
Yes, sir.
In respect to those elements. I want to understand for that. But if the inspector were to conclude that it is but a small component of change to the existing view, then in those circumstances he would be perfectly entitled to take the view as being either the impact is neutral or minor? Yes?
I wouldn't want to preempt what the inspector finds, sir.
I'm not asking you to preempt. I'm asking you a question to which I would like an answer.
Could you repeat the question then again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
If the inspector were to conclude that it is but a minor part of a view where there is change, then in those circumstances it would not be unreasonable for the inspector, using your characterisation, to regard the position as neutral or minor. Would you agree?
Yes, in this instance, minor would suffice.
Yeah. Or indeed neutral.
Not in my opinion. My opinion is clear that there is a minor contribution, and on that basis, there is a low degree of less than substantial harm.
Yeah. If the inspector were to regard it as sufficiently low as to be negligible, not saying that it isn't there, not saying that you can't see it, but the fact that you can see something and there's a change, that doesn't necessarily mean it constitutes harm for the purposes of calibration, does it?
Not necessarily, but it does not equally mean that necessarily it means no harm,
Well,
even if the contribution is negligible.
Well, that's a matter, as we're going to deal with the inspector. Now, in terms of how those matters move in, are any of the higher categories, high and very high, engaged here?
Forgive me, I'm just going to my HIA documents. I think there are, in respect of the Great Houghton Conservation Area and its sense of separation from Northampton, I would suggest that the contribution of the site lies around the moderate to high area, but certainly not the very high, sir. So very high is certainly not engaged.
So what you're saying in terms of that separation, is an important part of the asset's significance, or enables a remarkable and valued experience of the asset's significance from within its setting.
In relation to the site, yes, sir.
And that is so, notwithstanding the existence of the development in fairly close proximity, Bracknell's to the immediate west.
Yes, sir, that is notwithstanding Bracknell's and its current appearance within those views from the north over the site, yes.
And that's a relationship which you consider constituting one that abuts Great Houghton, yes?
The Great Houghton Conservation Area, sir, it does abut the, as we saw today, the bunding which has been placed around the Bracknell's industrial estate. It does abut the western edge of the Great Houghton Conservation Area, yes, for a short stretch.
Well, again, I'm not going to intrude upon the matters from that site view, just trying to understand the components and how they come to be assessed for these purposes. So far as the Great Houghton Conservation Area is concerned, are there any views on the conservation areas of the site?
No, sir.
Meaning, inevitably, there's no views from the site to the Great Houghton Conservation Area?
Not necessarily, sir. I believe the church spire lies within, sorry, I beg your pardon, so not from ground level within the conservation area did I observe any views of the site. From the site there are multiple, well, again, I couldn't access it, but from my assessment around the edges of the site and from the Bracknells, from the Hardingstone embankment, I could clearly see the Great Houghton Conservation Area.
You could see what
church, and you can see roofs.
Roofs, facades on the site visit today, yes,
Okay.
and the church spire and the trees cover as well.
Now, for the purpose again of understanding and assessing matters, one of the matters the inspector can have regard to is that element of intervisibility, the ability to look from one to the other, and from the other to the one. Would you agree?
Intervisibility is a consideration, yes, sir.
And that may have a bearing on the extent to which one characterises impact on setting. Yes?
The greater the intervisibility between a site and a heritage asset, the more likely there to be an impact, I would assume.
Right. In terms of that feature of intervisibility, does that appear within any of your criteria components that we can see?
In respect to the Great Houghton Conservation Area,
In terms of that as a feature for the purposes of logically carrying out an assessment so as to evaluate the impact on setting. If we look in here, can we see that being within any of the criteria that may be utilised for that purpose?
the criteria that I've utilised for evaluating setting is within GPA 3, sir. So
Does that include, well, I'm looking at your heritage impact assessment, because that's where your contribution setting exercise is undertaken, and you've provided an element to this. What I want to understand is that each feature of intervisibility, does that appear within these criteria, pages 71, 72, or somewhere else?
Oh, I beg your pardon, in pages 71, 72, no, I don't believe there is intervisibility within the criteria that I use. That's plainly not the case in the English, I believe.
It's a feature that if the inspector would say, in terms of giving weight to the question of that issue of intervisibility, that's not a matter which has fallen from this particular criteria for assessment. Correct?
As in, when we're talking about intervisibility, the two-way relationship between the site and the heritage asset is my understanding of the question.
Correct.
And in this instance, intervisibility is not explicitly mentioned in the criteria. The lack of any intervisibility does not preclude any level of harm arising to a heritage asset.
I didn't suggest that. It was whether it was a relevant consideration, and I think we agreed that it was a relevant consideration for being able to calibrate the question of harm in an appropriate circumstance. Yes?
It's a relevant consideration in evaluating the contribution that a site makes to the setting and significance of a heritage asset.
That particular characteristic doesn't fall within your particular methodology.
Nor do the vast majority of criteria that are used to evaluate settings. So, but no, I agree, not.
Now, again, utilising your definitions of impact, this is page 72, in respect to this, if the inspector were to consider that the impact on significance or setting was was either at most minor adverse or negligible, then the inspector, utilising your approach, would either be at low or indeed below low.
In the respect of minor adverse, it would be within low, below no, low if it was negligible, sir.
Now, if one is utilising your exemplification as to what that particular low categorisation is, it's loss or partial loss of a value characteristic or an element of its setting that is not fundamental or critical to its significance. So, if the inspector were to conclude, in terms of his approach to assessment, that the highest that we get to is that yes, it's something that the inspector notes, yes, it's something the inspector has seen, it is something of relevant which might be either negligible or might be negative, but not fundamental or critical. So if it's not fundamental or critical, then it's an element that must at most go into the low category. Do you agree?
I'm not sure where the negative came from, and there were an awful lot of criteria expressed within that question of negligible, negative.
Okay, let me break it down for you.
Thank you.
If it's not fundamental or critical to significance, then in those circumstances the feature is to be regarded as low in terms of less than substantial harm. Would you agree?
Not necessarily, sir, because the fundamental or critical to its significance strikes it within the low area, but as we track through low, middle and high, we see that again within middle, it is e.g. the partial loss of a value characteristic of a heritage asset that is an important or very important but not fundamental or critical, again the same language is used, element of significance. Again, so this is a yardstick that's intended to guide my conclusions. It is not intended to be a hard set of criteria. The industry guidance lacks any definition of low, middle and high, and therefore this is simply there to guide you on my findings and to guide the decision maker in that respect. So again, if high invokes if not fundamental or critical to its significance. Now the language may in time get refined, but I believe it provides at least some expression of where I find low, middle and high harm. It is a yardstick and nothing more, in the absence of any other yardstick within the industry.
Similarly, if the inspector considers that that which is said to be a characteristic upon which there is some harm, some impact, is not important or very important, then he still must go low and not middle. Would you agree?
It is less likely to fall in the middle category and is more likely to fall in the low category. Again, they are not hard boundaries, sir. They are indicative language, without which the only guidance would be low, middle and high. Just the language itself.
Now, with regard to views towards Great Houghton, and you've indicated those are essentially from the north, and I think to a degree from the east, is that correct?
Forgive me. The north, northeast and northwest, yeah.
Essentially within that, the northern arc, if I can put it that way.
That's an eloquent way of doing it, sir, yes.
Yeah, okay. As far as those set of views, the views towards Great Houghton, and it depends obviously where you are, perspective, distance and other matters, the feature that gives rise to a discernible physical element is the spire. Is that correct?
It is a landmark element and is the most discernible built feature within Great Houghton Conservation Area. Yes, I believe that's a matter which is described within the Great Houghton Conservation Area appraisal.
And it's essentially the top of the spire visible over the trees?
No, sir. As we saw today, it's the full Tuscan peristyle that we see, plus the full spire. Occasionally, there are more glimpse views, specifically in the western part of the Northern Arc, where the spire is more towards the top of the spire, but equally from western parts of the Northern Arc, if I may borrow the language, the peristyle is equally seen, as you may have observed today, sir.
And that's from a distance of how far?
From the Hardingstone embankment, which I have a small crib sheet on distances, so that I don't. So that's over a distance, I would say, of probably around about 500 to 600 metres, so from the Hardingstone embankment. The site I have is 430 metres deep, undeveloped, and so I would add another 200 metres to that roughly. I'm not quite sure of the precise.
Okay, if not sure, that's fine. We can have a look at those figures overnight. If you'd like to also have a look at those figures for yourself overnight, I'm very happy for you to come back and tell us tomorrow.
I shall do exactly that, sir.
Thank you very much. conservation area. The church itself, is there any impact on the church?
Not directly, sir, but in terms of views of the church from the west, yes, there would be an impact.
So if you're in the west looking towards Landscap, you would be, presumably from those circumstances, you'd have to be to the west of the appeal site in order to have a concern, or do you say it would be from elsewhere?
Or from the south and north as well, sir. And yes, west. Yes.
And the distance broadly to that, can you give us a view, or if not, we'll come back to it tomorrow on that?
I believe I have a more accurate view on this, sir, or a view, which is the site lies 1.1 kilometres. The eastern boundary of the site is 1.1 kilometres from the church.
So if we then move back, you presumably having to look at the circumstance. Presumably, if the site is to the back of you, then you're not having any impact from the church at all.
I would agree with that, sir, yes.
So you have to be in circumstances where either the church is in juxtaposition with the view, or alternatively, it is said to be intruding on the view.
Yes, from the south of the site along the Bedford Road, we can see the church, and the development would intrude on the view. From the lakeside area, the development would intrude on the view or visually detract from, and from the Brackmills embankment, the site would visually detract from the view.
Just again, in terms of your calibration, because I'm not going to go through and basically say this or say that, because you're not going to agree with me. However long I ask you those questions, so I'm not going to do that. But I just want, that's the reason why I was sought to understand your approach to those matters. But you nonetheless take the view that with regard to all of those views, effectively from the south of the A428 or to the east, such as the west of the appeal site, by reason of the development, what one has is less than substantial harm to the church.
Yes, sir, at the lower end of the scale.
Again, if the inspector were to conclude that by reason of distance or otherwise is not a particularly exceptional contribution, or alternatively was not something that was important or very important, then you may come to a view that it has no impact at all.
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Now, you've told us about the historic background, Doomsday Book, and thereafter. Clearly, we've got the intervening quarry use. The fact that the site has then been restored may have been restored to a form which is idiomatically not dissimilar to that which was before, but it does mean that there has been, certainly at the very least, a break in that continuity of relationship. Yes?
Continuity of relationship between the
site and either Great Houghton, Little Houghton, or its churches. Would you agree? It wasn't a rural idyll whilst it was a quarry.
It certainly wasn't, sir.
So were you there when it was a quarry?
No, sorry, no. I can detect from the AP that you circulated, the aerial photos that circulated, it didn't look very idyllic. I would, the break in continuity is an interesting question, so as landscapes evolve over time, and since Doomsday, of course, there's been some near 1,000 years of landscape change when this would have been flooded meadows, ridge and furrow, the Hardingstone embankment wouldn't have been there, it wouldn't have been a drained landscape. The turnpike has been and gone, and the Bedford Road has changed. It's course.
All that change, all that
change, absolutely.
Yeah. When we're looking at change, we actually have to do so in a manner which is proportionate, having regard to the genuine impact of that change. Would you agree?
So Sorry, could you repeat again?
Yeah,
So I apologise.
when we look at change, we have to take a proportionate approach to looking at that change, don't we? Change as is and change as proposed.
Well, in respect of the proposed development, yes, why not?
And in terms of undertaking that type of proportionate view of those matters, we're not seeking to preclude development occurring. Would you agree?
Not necessarily. I would not preclude development from this site, agreed. Indeed, it hasn't been precluded in the past.
Or indeed other development in even closer proximity, for instance, to Great Howe.
I'm not seeking or suggesting that any development be precluded from the area surrounding Great Houghton, sir. On the matter of proportion, I would agree with Mr. Gately that proportionate approach is important, and I would track the period of time that that quarry was in operation in relation to the position and relationship of Great Houghton within the Nen Valley, and find that some 25 years of operation is a relatively minor, proportionately, period of time in relation to Great Houghton's existence in the Nen Valley for some 1,000 years.
When the inspector is carrying out his own assessment, you presumably endorse him approaching these tests in a proportionate manner as well. Do you agree?
I don't think it's my position to endorse the inspector, sir, but yes, proportionate would seem fair.
Now, going back to the intervisibility of views, are there any intervisibility of views so far as the Little Houghton Conservation Area? We know what the views out, we need the views back to the edge of the conservation area. The edge of the conservation area being an area which is located just to the west of the church, is that correct?
That's my understanding, sir, yes.
Yeah. Beyond being able to see the church tower from views to the west, are there any other views of the conservation area that you were able to glean today, or which you've identified to the inspector?
Any other views from?
Areas to the west towards the Little Houghton Conservation Area.
As one passes over land east of the site towards the conservation area, that view is continuous.
Okay, well, leave the inspector to make his assessment of that. So far as views out from the church, no views out from the church.
As I said, I craned my head as far as I could get, but no.
And however you craned your head, similarly as far as Great Houghton Parish Church is concerned, similarly no views out from that either.
That is something that, forgive me, I didn't realise my phone was off. That is something that we inspected today on site, sir, and we found that we could not see the site from the churchyard. I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you very much. Bear with me for one moment, please. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harlan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gertley. It's 10 to 5. I think we have got time for some re-examination. Ms. Daly.
I don't have any, sir. Thank you very much.
I knew you had time. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So am I.
Read my mind.
Okay, thank you very much. I intend to end today's proceedings now. I don't think it's worthwhile starting another witness at this stage. What I'd like to do is to spend a couple of minutes reviewing the timetable that we've got. So in terms of the timetable that we've got to hear from the appellant's heritage witness and the cross-examination and everything that goes with that. Then we've got the commercial and the employment witnesses, and then we've also got the two planning witnesses. My view is the fact that we've done the site visit and we've also pushed the two closings into next week. I've looked at the obligation and I've looked at suggested conditions. I think those will be dealt with relatively quickly. Bearing those things in mind, my view is we can finish on Friday. I'd just like to get the views of the two parties. I'll come to Ms Daly first. Is that your view as well, or are we?
Yes, I think that's right. I think we will have 2 busy days, tomorrow and Friday, but I think we will get through it.
Okay. Mr Goatley, is that your view as well?
So with or without batteries, yes it is. Yes it is. I think we'll, out with the inquiry, myself and Leonard Friend might just have a chat about what we're doing with the various witnesses. And I don't think, frankly, none of this is with a view saying we have a difficulty. I don't think we have a difficulty, but nonetheless we might just look at what our prospective timings are on various matters, and we might be able to help you a little bit more in terms of guiding that tomorrow morning.
That would be good. That would be good. I mean, the reason for having the discussion now is if we did need more time, the more notice we get of having of that, the better. But if we can finish on Friday, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, and my understanding is that tomorrow and Friday there's no constraint on the use of this room. Not that I'm suggesting that we sit here late into the evening, but there's not a hard cut-off. So if we do need to get a witness finished, I think that the preference on this side of the room is certainly to get through everything by Friday, save the closings, if at all possible.
Okay, I would agree with that, with probably one caveat, and that would be I have said that I will finish by 5:30, and I think for me that is quite a hard and fast rule, because these sessions can be quite intensive, and what I want to do is make sure that we do get the best evidence from the witnesses, because that really is the crux of the matter. So in that case, we will start at 9:30 tomorrow. What we will do is we will take the Great Houghton Parish Council member. Was he or she contacted?
Yes, we've had confirmation that she will attend at, I think it's 9:40 tomorrow morning.
That's fine. We'll take her first, and then carry on with the heritage evidence from the appellant. Thank you. And with that, I will close the inquiry for today. Thank you very much for your help. Sorry, there was one thing. It's a question for the council. Are we all right leaving